done this far more times than I have, to jump in anytime. All submitted public comments need to be submitted prior to the meeting, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 6 tonight. So you're gonna hear a little bit more from me than you'd probably like. I'm gonna read the public comments, and I'll start with that. And some of them I managed to print out before the meeting, and others I'll have to pull up. Okay, my first comment is from, and I apologize if I mispronounce anybody's name, Vandalia Benson. It's addressed to members of the board. My family and I would like to thank you for continuing to fight for our children's safety. This last year at MCS had ups and downs, leaving many parents to feel isolated and uninformed. We have witnessed firsthand how fiercely you all have fought for our kids. We are immensely grateful for your tireless efforts in keeping us informed and giving us a voice. Thank you, Tim and Vandalia Benson. Second comment I have here is from Tim and Chelsea Hudson. Members of the board, I would just like to say a word of thanks to Dan Watson and the other members of the Mosier School Board. Our experience this last year at MCS was a discouraging one. During that time, our person of contact on the board was Mr. Watson. I would just like to thank him for not only listening to our complaints, but taking the time to follow through and ensure the safety of our kids. I know being a volunteer on the board can be a thankless job, but our family greatly appreciates the hard work it takes to make the difficult decisions to make sure the school operates successfully. Tim and Chelsea Hudson. All right, I'm gonna have to pull up a couple. This comment is from Cindy Camp. Dear MCS school board members, I'm writing this letter in full support of Dan Watson, chair of the MCS school board. I have known Dan for a couple of years now and have worked with him on projects benefiting MCS. While working with Dan, our interactions have always been conducted in a positive and constructive manner. Dan is a very important and dedicated member of the MCS school board who works long hours as a firefighter and who was just recently promoted to fire captain. This promotion proves that his management style and dedication to working long hours in any position that he holds has been noticed by his superiors and that his management style works for many different people. Not only does Dan work long hours at his job, he also works extremely long hours volunteering for many different roles on the board. There are too many to list, so here are just a few. Staff negotiations, helping push through the pay increases for MCS teachers, and getting the facilities committee up and running once again. Dan's response time for any issue going on at MCS is quick and precise. Dan has always made himself available for open and fair communication with community and school members. While watching the playback from recent board meetings, Dan and the board have made many decisions focusing on uplifting MCS and getting MCS back to the school that we all know and love. I once again state that I am in full support of Dan Watson, MCS board chair. Thank you, Cindy Camp. Okay, I've got a couple more here. Let me just see how many more I got. Let me look for this one. My sister's outside with a computer. Can I forward this letter to you, Thad, and ask you to read it so I can go grab that computer?
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you have I think you have 2 more, right? If you want to forward them both, feel free.
Yeah, got this one. I have 3 more. One you actually forwarded to me. It was submitted to you. From Jill Maynard. Do you have that one?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. I've just given you one from Dave Sather, and then I have another one. There are 3 total here remaining. Apologies, y'all. Okay, there we go, Thad. I'm going to go grab that computer.
Okay. All right. I'll start with a letter submitted to the board from Dave Sather. Dave introduces the letter with, please include this letter for public comment. This letter was my resignation letter from August of 2013 and was read to the board at that time. Dear directors of the Unified School Board, I would like to take this opportunity to formally announce that I have and will rescind my contract for principal for the upcoming year. My decision is based on the board's vote on June 18th, as well as the actions of Carol Schmid, which did nothing to foster, promote, or enable me to accomplish my job. This last year, I had to take on the reins of a job that I had no job description for, and that has been a revolving door for two other individuals. Mentoring through the fall and winter consisted not of guidance or support, but an executive director who was determined to focus on a new building. I was also told as late as March that I was doing fine and that, quote, Mosier Schools was in good hands. There were many actions that concerned me from the beginning of the year, the board being lied to about BMI being published on the report cards at Whitson Elementary and the White Salmon School District, parents being told that the BMI information had not been calibrated, and then that afternoon I was told to place the completed scores in my office. Schmid still meeting with the middle school teachers for meetings I was encouraged not to attend. A plan of assistance for one teacher that I believe was misguided, which was later used to question my judgment and my concern for the safety of the student body. For many decisions, I was sidelined, overruled in front of staff, or not even bothered to be consulted. Most recently was the choice for Saxon Math for grades 3 through 5. This decision was made between Janet Carter and Schmid, with complete disregard towards vertical alignment and instructional methodologies of the curriculum above and below those grades. One would assume that my master's in K-6 mathematical instruction would be of some use. The atmosphere of fear and mistrust that pervaded the staff was always clear. For example, before the June 18th meeting, two teachers asked me if the executive session was about them. Even the day after the May board meeting, Schmid was informed staff members privately of my renewal and if there were any other reasons why I should not be returning. I admit freely that I made mistakes in my job, which could have been averted if the spring had seen a more supportive employer. The plan of action that was developed for me was not for corrective action or guidance, but to further record and document missteps and not to tool me for accomplishing tasks. I am particularly disturbed by the survey monkey that was done on my performance. This was sent out and needed to be completed in a time frame that had me out of the state for former students' graduation. As an administrator, I welcome feedback and honestly need it to perform better. What disturbs me are blatant lies. I've only worn Carhartts once on a professional development day. The lack of classified staff and parental input, an impression that I am drunk or racist. British spelling and grammar used in a few entries, and how a master copy is missing. Despite all this, I was ready to work another year with Mosier as Schmid would be gone and hopefully the replacement would be experienced and would be an individual I could rely on. What changed that was the June 18th meeting. I take strong issue with the June 18th board meeting, and through conversations with legal counsel and the OSBA, believe that several actions were illegal and improper. I can only conclude that the public vote and Schmid's statement to the Dallas Chronicle was an attempt to further discredit and undermine me. I cannot work for such an organization that follows such unethical actions. There is no doubt that the article led to strong questioning by the Kenai Peninsula Borough School District of the employment for me. I believe that the only reason why the Lopez Island School District offered me a position was due to my blatant honesty on the matter and several references from Mosier teachers. Despite this, the Dallas Chronicle article and actions by the board did damage my career. I am sad to leave Mosier Schools, and for my wife, who is becoming a contributing member of the community, now has to leave again. I'm sad for Mosier Schools, which now has to begin another year with questioning parents in the midst of massive change. However, new and positive change can occur. I would hope that now the board can begin active conversations on the implementation of Common Core state standards, the instructional practices for ELL students, finding more time for science and social studies, and creating an atmosphere where parental input is sought, utilized, and encouraged. Sincerely, Dave Sather. This next public comment is submitted to us by Craig Funk. Supporting comments for MCS Board Chair Dan Watson. I've had the pleasure to know Dan Watson for well over a decade. I first came to know Dan through the fire service, where I retired as a fire chief with 34 years of public service. I've always found Dan to be a good person of high character who is committed to serving his community with integrity and honesty. I was glad to hear Dan was moving out to Mosier because I knew he would be an asset to this wonderful community. I have served on multiple committees and boards at nearly all levels of government, including serving my own community of Mosier as MCS board chair, MCS fundraising chair, subcommittees of the Mosier Fire District, and as an appointed representative to Team Mosier, which sought and received compensatory funding following the railroad oil train fire in Mosier. I know Dan Watson understands the importance of the role of chair, and that while governance comes with difficult decisions, that he will not place himself or his relationships above the greater good of the community.
Log out here.
Respectfully submitted, Craig Funk. And I've got one more, just give me a minute to find it here. One final public submission from community member and Mosier school parent Jill Maynard. I'm writing regarding the complaint made against the board chair and to express my support and utmost appreciation for Dan Watson. After the spring safety incident at the school, Dan responded in a timely and professional manner to address the failed communication issues and immediate safety concerns. Due to the nature of the incident and the widespread concerns from parents, I was worried that the community safety meeting would be disorderly and unproductive. However, it was far from that due to Dan. As the facilitator, he laid the groundwork early on in that meeting that it would be civil and respectful, and much to my amazement, it turned out that way. Beyond his appropriate, timely, and professional handling of the April safety incident, Dan has shown commitment to the overall health and success of the school. I am aware that Dan was a major advocate for increasing MCS teachers' pay. This seems long overdue and is something that our teachers deserve. Additionally, the competitive salaries will help with Mosier's retention of teachers, and I am appreciative that this was a priority of Dan's and the board. I do not know the nature of the complaint or Dan on a personal level, but as a parent of 2 kids at MCS and a community member, I am so grateful to have Dan Watson on the board. The number of special meetings and the time demand for our volunteer board is exceptional right now. I can only imagine the sheer number of hours that he and the other board members have dedicated to our school these past 4 months, not to mention the emotional toll it has taken. Their role, unfortunately, often goes without thanks or recognition. As a volunteer board tasked with making difficult decisions on behalf of the school, I have no doubt that the learning curve is high and that there may be missteps along the way. However, I do not for one moment question Dan's motivations as the board chair. It seems misguided to turn what should be expected disagreements into official complaints, adding to the board's already substantial workload when these volunteers are doing their best to act in the best interest of the school. My deepest thanks to Dan, as well as the 4 other board members for their time, dedication, and grace as they get our school through these difficult times. I truly can't imagine and wouldn't want to imagine to be in their role right now, and I am so grateful to each and every one of them. With gratitude, Jill Maynard.
Thank you, Thad. I think that wraps up our public comments. I'm appearing as my sister. Let me see if I can change that. I don't know that matters.
I'll take care of it for you.
Okay, appreciate it. All right, I'd like to proceed with the rest of the agenda. We have a long agenda today. Are there any changes, additions to the agenda? If there are no changes or additions, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move that we proceed with the agenda as published.
Can I get a second? Thanks, Avalia. All in favor? Anyone opposed? All right. So the first item on our agenda is an update on the DOE grant. And I've got a couple things there. Let me grab it. As many of you are aware, we have a local community member, Brent Foster, who's been very engaged in securing this DOE grant, Department of Energy grant, and helping shepherd it along. He wrote me a short update that I'll read to the board. Hi, everyone. Marie asked that I give an update on the DOE grant. Generally, all is well and busy. We had a good first intro meeting with the Department of Energy and the other recipients via Zoom. Tuesday at 2 p.m. is our first one-on-one meeting with our DOE point of contact, Michelle Tang. Dan Watson, Matt Kaler, and myself will be on the call with Michelle and Jill Maynard, who may join as well, but she will be in Alaska. So we are scheduled, her schedule is a little uncertain. Sorry, that's Jill Maynard, who's in Alaska. We have about 4 or so more meetings planned over the next month with DOE on discrete issues related to the grant, from scheduling and reporting to compliance with the National Environmental Policy Acts, NEPA, which is not a problem for us, says Brent. I've got the schedule and will pull Marie or Dan or others in as needed. We have a schedule of operations due in the first week of August, and I've already started working on it with the goal of a draft for Marie and Dan and anyone else to check out by the end of this week. I'm still trying to track some admin stuff down, such as who is MCS's contact on government grants admin program called SAM. Bernadine was helpful, but didn't know the answer, so I'm going to try Janet and then work through DOE to update our contact info and get access for this grant. Let me know if you have any specific questions. So there's no action item there. That's just an update from Grant. I thought it was important and helpful for everyone to hear where we were with the grant. And if anyone has further questions, I would direct them to the facilities committee or to Brent. I will also just note, which Brent shared with us, and I know Daphne was working on updating our website with, that there's been a fair amount of press on our school receiving this grant, including articles in Columbia Gorge Press, the Oregon Capitol Chronicle, and a press release from Senator Wyden's office, and also that OPB is working on a story. So big kudos to all of the folks that have been involved in this and that continue to be involved. A lot of gratitude for that, which will be great for our school. Anything further on the DOE grant before I move to our next item? Then we have an update on the interim ED listing. And I don't think I have a whole lot to share there, other than we have received, Dan and I have worked with OSBA as the 2 points of contact with your delegation and from the last meeting to receive the list from OSBA, and we've started going through that list of potential interim candidates. And we, using the qualities and qualifications that we discussed at the last meeting and approved, have also created a job posting for the interim ED position, which we will work on posting. Are there any thoughts or questions there from the board? Okay, great. Well, once that, we'll get that job posting up on our website, and then I just encourage folks to, think about candidates, and hopefully we'll have some from the OSBA list as well to bring to you all in August or shortly. Is Jen Langley on this call?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. She had indicated that there would be approval of potentially for approval of a new hire. We will we'll proceed. We'll skip agenda item 6 then, which is an update from her. And then I requested an action item here on 7, and I'd be curious for your all reactions. But it seemed to me after our last board meeting that we had not resolved. Although we've made great progress on filling the many important roles and responsibilities that our outgoing business manager used to take care of, and with a lot of support from the ESD and our treasurer, Avelia, that we need to resolve how we will be proceeding in listing and our search for the business manager. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at our last meeting, we decided on a firm for our permanent ED search and also a process for our interim ED search, but we did not actually discuss the business manager role. And I would just like to make sure we are proceeding on that front as well. And so we don't have to lean forever on the graces and hard work and wonderful work of the ESD. Thoughts?
Yeah,
Is my memory
remind-
serving me correctly? Yeah.
Remind me, did the search firm that we selected for the permanent ED hire, do they also do business manager searches?
I believe so.
I believe so too.
So is it fair to say that one option would be to use them for both the BM search as well as the permanent ED?
I think so. Julie and I can also, can reach out to them and just confirm. I guess one good thing to accomplish at this meeting would be just, if that's not the case, then to direct us or someone to go and start that search so that for our next meeting, we have the ability, if it's timely enough, to approve someone if we find someone that's available. So, as a result of this meeting, either directing us to go use that same search firm, or if that doesn't work, just making sure it encompasses everything so that we can accomplish it without having to come back to a meeting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly comfortable using the same search firm and, going ahead and empowering whoever, if it's you and Julia, Dan, to post the business manager job description. That should be readily available because, we would have posted that position a year and a half ago or so, I think. The job description really hasn't changed. So I think we should go ahead and get it posted. And I can't speak for the whole board, but I'm certainly comfortable using the same search firm to help us, increase visibility of that posting. The only other thing I think we probably need to be cognizant of is just what the interview team makeup would be. Normally that's a position that would be hired primarily by our ED. So since, if we're going to try to fill it before we have an interim ED in place, we can certainly do that. And we have done things like that in the past as a board when we're absent in ED and need to fill a key position. But we should probably be explicit about the interview team that we're going to involve in that selection process.
I mean, I think engaging our acting administrator would be a good start.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. I think that is definitely appropriate to include our acting administrator on the team. We might want to, in the past, what we've done, I think is do that and include one or two board members and maybe a member of the staff if someone's able to.
Yeah, staff, maybe MTA as well, since they also have that HR role, finding somebody who has the approach that fits with what they need.
Yeah.
I think having Avelia as our treasurer, if she's willing, or someone from the ESD who's been doing this role and understand. I mean, we need someone who can speak shop, which I have learned. It's a language I don't necessarily fully know, but was highly impressed by all the other smart women in the room when we did a download a couple of weeks ago in the school. So I just think that that's an important person or two to have in the meeting to make sure that these programs that only people who really are in the school finance world are comfortable and familiar with, that they can really vet that this person has the credentials and qualifications needed.
Well, I mean, is it appropriate for us to maybe make a motion along the lines of, engaging our search firm for help in finding candidates for the business manager? I forget the name of the search firm now. Forgive me for that. The same firm we selected in our last meeting to do the permanent ED search, that we engage them for, putting together a business manager search, and that we ask Avelia and Dan, or Avelia and Julia, to come up with a proposal on an interview team that we can approve in our next special meeting. I think that covers getting the job posted right away and getting a search firm identifying candidates, and gives us a little bit of time to, by identification of an interview team, I mean, we should probably confirm that like our current interim business management support or someone else from the ESD actually is interested in helping us hire the next one, before we commit them to that in this meeting. So I could make a motion that we utilize the same search firm that we've already selected for our permanent ED search to help us in a shorter term search for a business manager. And that we ask Evelia and Dan to work with that firm to come up with a proposed interview team for the position that we can approve in the next meeting.
A second. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thanks. Excited to get that going. All right, the next item on the agenda is our Policy Plus subscription and updates. Thanks to an inquiry that Dan made about sort of what our Policy Plus subscription was getting us, we were able to uncover that the school currently has a subscription, which I can read the details of with OSBA or through OSBA to get our policies updated, or recommendations, I should say, for updates to our policies. Those recommendations are sent to a point of contact, which was our former ED, who is receiving those emails. The last email was sent on March 31st, 23, with a series of policy update suggestions to our policies that we would need to review and then approve if we so choose. Some of them were marked as flagged as highly important updates. The OSBA point of contact has forwarded that information to Dan and myself, and I would propose that we have somebody look through those policy updates and bring them to the board at our next regular meeting, so that we can update our policies in accordance with what's been suggested through the subscription. And if people want more information on the subscription, I can read the language that was sent to us about kind of what it entails, but it just seems like it fell through the cracks. It went to our former administrator right before a very busy time at the school in April, as you all are aware, and so it has languished a bit and it needs to be addressed. I'm not prepared tonight to present what those policy updates are and those suggestions, but I'm flagging it for our next meeting, and I would I think one of us should probably take responsibility for looking them over.
Provided our next regular, I assume my next meeting, you mean our next regular meeting, not like if we have a special meeting next week to look at.
Right.
Provided the next regular meeting's not like in 1 or 2 weeks, provided we have, at least 3 weeks into like mid-August or late August, I'd be willing to take that on.
Great.
I believe it's maybe August 22nd, but I have to check the calendar and see.
That sounds right. Yeah, I'm willing to do that.
The 22nd or the 28th. I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm willing to take that on if the board wishes me to do so.
Great. Well, then I would like to make a motion that Thad review the policy update that comes with our Policy Plus subscription from OSBA, and come back to the board with a first reading and review so that we can decide on whether to adopt the updates recommended to our policies. Do I have a second? Okay, Marie, thank you. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Thank you all. All right, then I have this marked as an action item on the agenda, although I'm not sure action is required here, but I did want to allow for action. And the item is changes to the meeting minutes and other updates to the MCS website. And it's come, Dan and I, as you all are aware, met with a few folks at District 21 a few weeks ago And one of the items that was flagged was for us to consider changing was in order to make our meeting minutes more readily accessible to all of the public, to not only post them on Facebook, but also to, but rather, I should say, to post them to YouTube in the way that D21 does, and then to our school website. And so my instinct is that to make that, since this is a change to the way that we post our minutes, that it may be appropriate for the full board to make a decision and some of this migration has begun, but I wanted you all to be aware of it, and I wanted to make sure that everybody was in accord and there were no concerns with switching from Facebook to YouTube. I also think it's important for everybody listening to this recording to be aware that the switch is going to be happening, and then posting our minutes to the website. The old minutes recordings will not be lost, and they are currently being uploaded to the website so that people will have access to all of those old Facebook recordings. Dan?
I feel like Robin may have something to add here. So I just wanted to make sure there was space for Robin to speak about this and her purview.
Yeah, I can talk about it. There's not much to talk about. YouTube offers us a different approach to the people that are watching. It offers us a bit more ADA compliance than Facebook. You also don't need an account to access it. You don't need an account to use Facebook, but it sometimes makes that really painful for you trying to go in for some folks. Yeah, most way through putting the old ones up from all the way back to January. I'd like to ask you guys how far back you'd like me to go. I've decided that this year was where I should start. YouTube had some extra verifications that I needed to work through, so I worked with the district to make sure that I had those verifications and that we're holding the information in the right place, under the right structure, certainly within the D21 NWASCO system. And yeah, I welcome any other questions anyone else has.
I don't know, just to add to the discussion, I think that having, this year be available and then if someone asks for something else, we can always make it available, right? If someone requests a different meeting or a different date, then we can make it available. Is it other members of the board, does that seem reasonable?
For this year, you mean 2023?
Yeah, back to January.
I tend to think in school years, so I don't know how much work this is asking you to do this, Robin. We've had a ton of meetings recently, but my sense is that if we went back to the beginning of the school year last year and the school calendar, we would only be adding whatever that is, September, October, November, and there weren't any until December. So maybe 4 more meeting recordings.
Yeah, I can do that. That seems super reasonable. Yeah. Once I've got them on the YouTube channel, I'm leaning on you guys to work with your web developer to put them on the website. But there is a link to the channel and they are all in there. Once somebody is in the YouTube channel, there's no extra space once somebody is in the channel. So the link to the channel is the same also. The other last thing, I guess, is the blue live stream link on the front of the web page that we've been using is going to switch to a YouTube link as well. And folks, if they want to participate in the meeting, will have to, I think, request this link as well.
That all sounds great to me. Thank you for your help with this. I want to also thank Daphne, who's updated several things, including correcting the spelling of my name to the website, and just been just shepherding a lot of the cleaning up of the website. This will be an ongoing process as far as having our school policies as readily available as possible and sort of in making sure things are in places that are easy to locate and that the information is fresh. As I mentioned before, she's also including some of the recent press about the DOE grant and other things. And yeah, just gratitude to her and Robin for all of their work on kind of giving this a scrub because it was overdue.
Thank you. Yeah, Daphne's been awesome as always. I have one more thing. I'm so sorry. In the YouTube descriptions, it's not actually allowing me to post links to the YouTube descriptions, and we are relying on the website holding the agendas. So the videos and the agendas are in a slightly different place if the person comes in via YouTube. I am saying that they need to head to the website and to the right page of the website. I'm trying to jump through the steps as fast as I can to fix that, and they will be fixed eventually. It's just taking me a bit longer because we're inside the MOSCO system. So thanks.
Great. I think this is all moving forward. I'm not sure we need a motion to change the way our minutes are, where they're being posted. It's not a change to the process so much as just the platform. But I wanted everyone to be aware. Does that all sound good to folks? Do folks need 5 minutes before we jump into the complaints? We have 2 complaints to hear. Let's take 5 minutes. And I will also let our complainant, first complainant, know that they are up. Okay, do we have the full board back? I'm gonna look through my video here. Waiting on Marie. Do we have Carol Deerholt? See Greg. Carol, is that you?
Yes, it is. Hi, Julia.
Hi, Carol. We're just waiting on Marie. Avelia has texted her family is having some kind of car trouble on the interstate, so she may need to jump out here, but we will still have 4 board members. And hopefully she'll be able to return. I'm just waiting on Marie. I will ping her. There. Nope, she's hopping on.
So sorry, everybody.
It's okay. Unfortunately, it sounds like Avelia has to jump. Is that right? Is Avelia gone?
Yeah, she is going to meet her husband, whose truck just broke down on the highway.
Thad, I'm curious for your thoughts here. We have 4 board members, but we are also hearing a complaint against 1 board member. Whether or not we can proceed with hearing the complaint, but then we wouldn't be, seems as though we are in a bit of a conundrum.
Yeah, I'm just checking the bylaws right now. I'll just read the section on a quorum. A quorum consists of 4 directors. A director is considered present if by use of any means of communication, all directors participating may simultaneously hear and speak to each other during the meeting. No decisions requiring board action shall be made by the board at any meeting at which the required quorum is not present. In the event fewer directors than a quorum are present, the remaining directors may, upon a simple majority, adjourn the meeting to another day and or time. So we have a quorum present. The verbiage here doesn't really cover the case where one of that quorum obviously would have to abstain from vote on any action, since the complaint is against that member. So I'm unsure myself.
Let me perhaps try to call Avelia and see. It sounds as though if she were to call in and be able to hear us and be able to communicate with us, it may be sufficient for a quorum here.
The bylaws are pretty clear.
All right, let me try calling
She's
her.
gonna attempt to call in with her phone.
Okay. I'll go over the basic ground rules because these have been Avelia's heard before, and it's the same process we've used when hearing complaints. The we will allow for the complainant to have 5 minutes, and I will keep time to present their complaint. And the first complaint will be the one filed by Carol Deerholt. Carol, you'll have 5 minutes to present your complaint. Your time will be limited to any additional detail or information concerning the complaint, but not to raising new issues. The process for raising new issues would be to file a new complaint. This is an opportunity to expand on or present your complaint, the current complaint. And then after that 5 minutes, the board will have an opportunity to ask Carol questions about her complaint. We've all received it and reviewed it. Here's Avelia. And then we will give Dan an opportunity, Watson, an opportunity to respond to the complaint. And then we will also have an opportunity to ask him questions related to the complaint before making any decision. Avelia, can you hear us?
It could be quite hard to hear and use the phone because she has to unmute and mute with her fingers. So she's driving, asking her to mute and unmute might be quite a difficult thing to ask of her. That's the only consideration there.
Yeah. I do have a little bit more background information to share, but I would prefer to share it once Avelia is on. I see Avelia. Avelia, when you have us, can you just confirm that you can hear us?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, great. I want you to also be able to participate or ask questions if you want to, but I understand you're driving at the moment. The way I'm going to give a little bit more background information, and then we're going to give Carol 5 minutes to present her complaint. So it should be just listening, and hopefully you don't need to touch your phone while you're driving for the next 10 minutes at least or so. And I will keep an eye on and if you all could help me making sure that we have Avelia on and that we don't lose her. Because it's a little hard to toggle off some screens here. So the first thing I want to make everyone aware of is something that was, yep.
I do think, oh no, there she is, sorry, never mind.
The first thing I want to make everyone aware of, and that was news to me actually, and I will apologize to our complainants, both of them, who my initial notice indicated that this complaint would be heard in executive session. I then consulted with OSBA legal counsel, with PACE, and with our general counsel on the process for hearing a complaint against a co-chair. And in addition to reviewing our policies on that matter, and the feedback that I received initially from OSBA Legal Services, and then with confirmation from the other two sources, legal sources as well, was that because our board is designed in a way that we have very limited powers to discipline or remove a fellow board member, in the way that we are organized in our bylaws, and Thad can speak to this as well, is in a way in which we have a foundation membership, and the foundation membership elects or removes members. The board can make recommendations to remove a member, but we cannot actually remove a member nor discipline one. So just to sort of set expectations here, we as a board could make a recommendation for the removal of a fellow member, but we could not remove the member ourselves, according to OSBA Legal Services PACE and our general counsel. And because we are limited in that way, our directors do not fall under officers in the policy language, and so are not protected or subject to the same, they don't fall under the provision for executive sessions that is used for our staff and personnel discussions when the complaints are filed. So that's why we are hearing this complaint in public session. It also just limits what the board ultimately can do here. I will make one related point, which is that our board is not to discuss personnel performance matters in public session. And because the complaint does touch on personnel performance, I would just caution each of us not to engage in any discussion of the performance of any of our staff in this discussion and in considering this complaint. I think that's it. Is there anything else before we give Carol her 5 minutes? Thad, Marie, Avelia. Okay. All right. I appreciate you bringing this complaint, Carol, and the time it takes to prepare a complaint, and I will start my timer.
Okay. I think it's sad that there is a complaint, and it is in public, and it isn't to embarrass anyone, but it is the only method that anybody has. And my hope is that the board will become more transparent, will stop hiding behind Zoom meetings, and will be more responsive to the community. My complaint lists 6 policy violations, which you all have a copy of. They range from some basic to some very serious board responsibilities that, as chair, Dan Watson chose not to fulfill last year. I don't know if you're going to share those. You requested that I didn't speak to or read those complaints. So you just have to know, I suppose, that there are 6 policy violations. The implications of this have produced a chaotic situation at school, even a school without an executive director, a business manager losing 2 skilled and experienced board members, and a facilities team without experienced leadership. I want to address the policy BBF, which is standards of conduct. Board members will treat other board members, the exec director, staff, and the public with dignity and courtesy, and will provide an opportunity for all parties to be heard with due respect for their opinions. Dan was fully responsible for the business manager's resignation due to the pressure he placed on her, his random and untimely request of her, his lack of organization, but above all, his rudeness to her in a public meeting. Bernadine was the best business manager the school has ever had. His treatment of her was abhorrent. After publicly reprimanded her during a board meeting, Dan has still not even given her an apology. Dan appears to have a command and control style of leadership, which is outdated and inappropriate for a school board chair. He ignored the business manager's advice, showing his personal support of unions is more important to him than a financially stable school. Building a team with the board, the admin, and the union with positive outcomes is important, but no effort was done to produce this last school year. Policy BBF continues, a board member will keep information discussed in an exec session confidential. Discussing the ED's performance with union leaders is a violation of this policy, and as is discussing information from an exec session with staff. Confidentiality is not apparent, as what was discussed in exec was shared with union leaders, maybe due to Dan's strong support of unions over any desire to protect confidentiality. It's unclear. A chair must hold confidentiality, and not to do this is a serious violation. Evaluation of the ED CBG policy. 2 things. Anytime the performance is deemed to be unsatisfactory, the director will be notified in writing and will be given an opportunity to correct the problem. Director has not been notified of any unsatisfactory performance. Nothing was put in writing or documented by the board chair, nor had any opportunity been given to correct any problems before the board decided on a non-renewal of a contract, direct violation of that policy. Dan had not met with the ED between September 22 and May 23 to discuss school business. His inability to form a working relationship with Janet Carter, to even meet with her, shows lack of skill as a board chair. As a result of this, Dan has left the school in an unstable operational position. And by relentlessly pursuing the non-renewal of Janet Carter's contract, he left a 20-year exemplary employee without salary or health insurance with 2 days' notice. What message does that give to any employee or, most importantly, future employee? In summary, Dan, as a chair of the board, has shown disregard for board training and an inability to follow board policies, breaking at least 6 policies last year. He has not shown skill in building relationships with the admin staff and has made no effort to build a board team working towards common goals. This isn't really about Dan. It's moving forward. Mosier School deserves better. The school needs a chair who can willingly receive extensive board training, not just 2 hours recently, has true leadership skills, is interested in developing teamwork and consensus building, who can work positively with the admin staff and can put what is best for the school before any personal needs, and is able to produce a stable environment for employees and, most importantly, our students. Thank you.
Apologies. I was trying to work my sister's computer's mouse, which is different than the one I have at home. Thank you, Carol. Board, now is your opportunity to ask questions of Carol about you've all received the complaint. We will go through the complaint. My proposal would be that we go through the complaint point by point with Dan. I don't know that that's necessary with Carol, but if you have questions, feel free. I have a few. I can also start if you'd like. I'll start with a couple if folks. Carol, you've been on the board for, is it right that you've been on the board for a number of years?
Yes.
How many years would you say? I am not aware because I'm a relatively new member. How many years had you been on the board when before you left? You just ended your term.
3 years.
3 years.
I think.
I think it was 4.
Oh, was it 4? Yeah. Thanks, Thad. It could have been 4.
But it would be fair to say that you're one of the longest serving. You and Thad then would be the 2 longest serving members of the board. Is that right?
Yes. Currently, yes.
Yeah. Some of the issues you've raised in your complaint, like failure to hold a July 2022 meeting, are really old. Why didn't you raise them earlier when you were on the board?
Those were concrete examples. There were other examples of that policy violation. And I don't have that. Let me bring that complaint up. And most, I think, without going through every one of these, I think all of these I have brought up personally with Dan. Whether the July meeting was brought up exactly about the July date, I don't remember. The important thing is that we're not following, the BBBDA policy was not followed.
Specifically, so I noted a number of issues you raised. You raised the minutes being on Facebook, that there was no July meeting in 2022, the sharing of the check register to the screen. Why were none of those issues raised while you were on the board? That had been, like, the sharing on Facebook had been something we've been doing for a while.
Some of those issues were raised. I requested the minutes to be, I was concerned that the minutes were not available to the public. that I think the last minutes that were on the website was 2019, and I'm not looking at it now, but I think that's what, and I had brought that up. And I had brought up that we needed training as a board so that these sort of things would happen. I think it's really important that the board has training. I think it's really important that the board answers to the public. And having, when we went to Facebook minutes, it did not seem to be a good way to share minutes with the public. And I did bring that up.
On the July meeting, I do have an email from you that was sent on June 10th of this year, asking for an agenda item to be added. And you note if this facilities agenda item isn't added, it's not added in June, then I will quote you, there's usually no meeting in July, so nothing will happen before school returns in August. It seems like that it's fairly common not to have a July meeting. Would you say that's right?
I think it's certainly in the years that the last couple of years, it's been common not to have a July meeting. But again, our website and our policies state that we will have an organizational meeting in July. So I think that's the responsibility of the chair to either change the policy or acknowledge it and say that the meeting will be deferred till August. Just to simply ignore it is not acceptable.
So, Carol, I'm sure you're aware of our bylaws. The bylaws provide, and tell me if I've got this wrong, section 4.1 provides that the board may decide to recess in July and or August. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Isn't that what we were doing?
Isn't that what we were doing?
I mean, by not holding a meeting in July.
I would think so, but our policies say that our regular meeting schedule will be established at the organizational meeting. And we either follow that or we change our policies. It doesn't matter to me. And I think what's important is that a board chair, and most important, our public know what to expect from us. So if we're not going to do that, then we need to change our policies. I remember we had frequent requests for a board calendar. We didn't get it until finally in September, which was pretty difficult. So again, I think it's important that our board chair leads with clarity and doesn't leave board members in confusion about when there are board meetings. So whether it's held in July or not is probably not that important. What is important is the clarity and following the policies.
For clarity, you keep referring to Dan as the board chair, but these are about activities that occurred before he assumed the chair role, right?
No, it's a little confusing. Dan was co-chair. Thad had made it very clear. I think the year before Dan became co-chair, so I think the last 2 years, Thad had asked for a transitional year and said he wanted to step back. Dan took over. The school year, the board year starts on July the 1st. So Dan takes that responsibility on as of July the 1st. And Thad made that quite clear to us.
Thad?
Yeah, it was in the June 2022 meeting. It was on June 14th, actually. I was the acting chair of that meeting, and we discussed a July meeting. I went back and referenced the recording of that meeting today, and there was about a 3 or 4 minute long discussion about whether to have a July meeting. And at both the 1 hour and 2 minute mark and the 1 hour and 5 minute mark, Carol, you made a direct request not to have a July meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And the board deliberated on that and ultimately decided not to have one. We ended up having the meeting on August 2nd. So I just like to point that out, that it does come across as a bit, questionable to me to request a meeting not happen in July and then try to ding the chair a year later for that. But if someone, but I'd also like to say that And I can say that about a lot of the things in this complaint. If a chair needs to be held responsible for not having a meeting in July, not publishing some agendas 3 days before a meeting, then that chair needs to be me. I mean, I've been chair of this board for 4 years. Dan and I officially transitioned to, we've had a co-chair model for all of those 4 years. And that wasn't my request, first with Marty Severdia as a co-chair, and then more recently with Dan. I've been the primary chair, and that's demonstrated in who's run the meetings all the way through and including December of 2022, this most recent December. The handoff for Dan running the meetings and really taking the lead role as a co-chair happened this most recent January. So I just like to point out that, you know, if a board chair needs to be held responsible for some of these violations, you know, that person needs to be me. I set the precedent for many of these things. But I'd also like to point out that, you know, there is a discrepancy in our policy, which calls out, you know, a July organizational meeting, but then our bylaws say the board can recess in July and August. Our policies both also say that the board can change the date of a meeting at will and publish that. And we have done that many times to accommodate board members' varied schedules and vacation times. I think my recollection from the June 14th meeting, from having watched the video just today, was that, you know, the reason for the request, Carol, to not have a meeting in July is that you had vacation plans and were going to be out of town for most of the month. And we did have a difficult time finding a date. What we ended up doing in that meeting was selecting an emergency date of July 26th, I believe, in case we needed to have a meeting in July for some emergent business. But with the intention of not having that. And that was an official board action. So I think it's important to point that out. If I agree that maybe there needs to be an adjustment to our policy to better align with our bylaws if we're going to allow ourselves to recess in July. But I just like to point out that, you know, if someone needs to be held accountable or dismissed from the board for you know, not following that particular policy to have a July meeting to the letter of the law, that person needs to be me. I'm the one that was in charge as board chair when that happened. And I did my best to accommodate all the needs of the board and their varied summer schedules. So I would feel very uncomfortable and it would feel unethical to me to hold a co-chair that did not have a part in facilitating that meeting responsible for that decision. That's not appropriate in my opinion.
I think we're focusing on the first 6 words of that complaint, and we're not looking at the rest of it. Yes, there is a policy discrepancy, and that I completely understand that. I do think it's the role of whoever is chair to get the bylaws and the policies correct. I think what's most important is the rest of that, the action items listed on the calendar were not adhered to. We're not talking about July. They were not adhered to in the following months: July, August, September, November, December, February, March, and April. Therefore, omitting actions on many impactful issues. And those things.
I could also point out that in my 4 years as board chair, we always miss some items on that board calendar. That board calendar is a recommended calendar. It's not a requirement or captured in policy. And if if a board chair, in my opinion, if a board chair needs to be disciplined or removed for failing to meet, you know, 1 or more items on that recommended board calendar, then in the history of the school, we don't have a board chair that's satisfied the duties of the role. I don't think I can say with a straight face that in any of my 4 years as chair, I ever was able to successfully execute every single one of the items on the recommended board calendar in the time frame that the calendar dictated.
Then that's a great clarification. And again, the board needs to get organized and make some changes and make a board calendar that's appropriate. But if you read through these things, the board calendar is recommended by OSBA. And OSBA has a reason for making these recommendations. And this is about 6 violations, not just whether there was a meeting in July. The rest of that complaint is actually more important. But that, you know, I accept that if you say that, you know, many of these weren't met, these actions, then I think they're very impactful. Obviously, the board calendar states goal-setting dates for the ED in June, quarterly reviews in September, December, and an evaluation in March. To my knowledge, Thad, you did keep to that. But none of these were completed this last school year, and that produced a major violation. So I think we need to look at the impact of some of these violations, and the reason for the complaint is requesting some changes so that the public knows what's going on, and obviously the staff needs to know what's going on.
Thank you, Carol. Marie or Avelia, do you have questions for Carol before we will go point by point through the complaint, and I apologize if it seems a bit disorganized to folks watching, or also like we are fixating on the first or one or just 2 items, Carol. We will get to all of them. I want to allow time if Marie or Avelia have a question for Carol.
Not at the moment. I'd like to proceed with hearing the rest of the violations.
Okay. Then I would like to turn it over to Dan. Dan, you'll have an opportunity if you'd like to say something before we go through, and then I would propose, unless there are any objections, that Carol has organized her complaint by policy, and then I'm happy to read the complaint item so that we all are aware of the item we were discussing, and then I would suggest we have a brief discussion and move through it that way. Does that work for everybody? Any objections?
Let me see. Do we still have Avelia?
Yeah, she just texted me.
Yes, I'm back.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Carol. And I will turn it over to Dan. Otherwise, Dan, we can go through you're welcome to speak, or we can start with questions.
I don't have anything to say about the July meeting from last year.
All right, I'm going to jump into the complaint first. You know, the overarching, I think this has been discussed, but the overarching premise here is that you were acting in the role of chair, despite being in the official title of co-chair. Carol alleges that Thad made it clear to board members that Dan would be taking the primary role as chair. Can you just clarify for us whether you were co-chair or chair?
I've always been a co-chair prior to this year, prior to our current board makeup, with you as the vice chair.
And that change happened, what was that? That was in one of the June meetings prior to this being filed, I believe.
I believe so.
Okay. I think that's an important distinction between being the chair and the co-chair, is one Thad made. The first item on the complaint is the alleged policy violation of the public charter school board member standards of conduct. The policy is BBF. In some, it says that I'm going to try to figure out how to summarize these, but that the board members is a public official who must apply with the ethics laws for public officials, and board members will treat other board members, the executive director, staff, and public with dignity and courtesy, and will provide an opportunity for all parties to be heard with due respect for their opinions. The allegation here is that the MCS business manager was disregarded, her microphone silenced, and rudely reprimanded in a public board meeting by the co-chair on June 12th. and that demands had been made of her with unreasonable timelines, and that her expertise as a business manager was ignored, particularly in regard to negotiating the teachers' union contracts, and that that Dan put the school at financial risk. I do have some notes here and questions. If it's okay, I'm gonna ask a couple questions of Dan, and then I'll open it up to the rest of you. And if anybody else would rather jump in, but feel free. I just think otherwise we risk stepping on one another. Dan, do you recall the June 12th meeting where you silenced Bernadine, our business manager?
I do.
Did you mute her in order to stop her from sharing any kind of information with the board?
No.
Can you explain why you muted her?
I thought that the meeting was getting out of control and not following the decorum that is expected of a public meeting.
And then on the then there's also an allegation here that you had ignored her expertise and recommendations, particularly around the COLA, which I think we'll get to again, but and then put unreasonable demands on her. My recollection is that Bernadine had emailed the Friday before and said, you know, I don't have time to get you the budget. This has been a really stressful week. I think I actually have a copy of the email. So what I have is an email from Bernadine on Friday, June 9th saying, I'd like to request the budget discussion on June 13th be rescheduled. This week has been unexpectedly busy and stressful. I need more time to adequately prepare and capture all the expenses. I apologize for the inconvenience. Dan, then I have a response from you that says, Bernadine, would another week be enough time to have it prepared? Thank you. I don't see in that an unreasonable request or pressure on the business manager. Were there any other communications in which you sort of pushed her to move faster or said that a week was unacceptable?
No, I don't recall any other communications, although the timing, I don't know exactly, but we were doing negotiations with the MTA at the same time. So there was a lot of work that was going on there. So I think she had her hands full with all those things that were going on. There were emails between her and Leah and I as the MTA negotiating team, but they were along the same lines. I don't know exactly the timing on what, you know, if they were the same week or the week before or whatever. So hopefully that's clear, but no other communications that were pushing her to move faster or anything like that.
I don't think I have any other questions. Thad, Marie, Azalea.
Yeah, I've got a couple things. Just for historical background or context, in my very first year as a member of the board, almost 6 years ago, when we were, you know, back in the old days when we had every board meeting in person, we had an unfortunate meeting also in June. So at the very end of my first year on the board, in which a member of the public raised their voice significantly during the public comment period and declined to restrain their tone and their volume. Bernadine was actually chair of the board at that time and took what I felt was a very appropriate action to cancel the meeting out of an ability to control it. Asked the board to vacate the premises. And it was, I remember at the time just ending my first year on the board and kind of really learning about what being a board member meant. And being a board chair meant being pretty impressed with the very difficult decision to do that on the spot. It also really put the board in a tough spot because we had a lot of important business to accomplish that night. And we were unable to do so because the meeting got canceled before it even started due to the conduct of one person in the meeting. I still feel to this day that was the absolutely appropriate thing to do almost 6 years ago. With modern times and Zoom meetings, if in the unfortunate case where such an event does occur, we do have tools to, and we covered this in fact in our OSBA training we just took a few weeks ago. to gain control of a meeting that's gotten out of control and continuing to conduct board business. And muting someone who is raising their voice and not conducting themselves professionally is really about the only tool that we have to other than canceling the meeting. My recollection of the events that led to that microphone being muted in that June meeting was that Dan was sharing a check register to the screen that had been shared with the board hours before the meeting started. And there was a very respectful request made to not share it to the screen because it did contain pay stub amounts. And I pointed out that I felt Dan, in order to make sure the school was able to properly meet their fiduciary responsibility and approve or disapprove of a check register on very short notice, having received it, shortly before the meeting, he was sharing it to the screen to make sure everybody could see it. It was certainly not my intention at that time to criticize the time frame with which the information was shared, but just to point out why. I would have, if not having been cut off with a raised voice, continue to point out that all salaries of public employees are public. In fact, we spent multiple meetings over many months in the first half of the school year and the end of last summer, publicly debating and sharing salaries of every position in our school. I'll just go to say that, it's always unfortunate when emotions are running high, and they were in that meeting. And, we have so many passionate people at the school, both on the board and the staff. But this policy about conduct, I think is reasonable to apply to not just the board, but to anyone attending a meeting, including school employees that are in the meeting and contributing to the meeting. If I had been board chair in that same time, I would have done exactly the same thing. I would have muted the person that was getting out of control, because I don't think it didn't feel to me there was any other choice. And I just wanted to provide that historical context, because in my 5, going on 6 years on the board, I have lived that scenario in a couple different times. And in both instances, I've seen it handled as well as I think can be by a volunteer board chair. So that's my comment on that. I had something else, but I can't remember what it is, so I'll turn it over to someone else.
I too reviewed that meeting, and for those that are interested in doing so, it was the June 12th, 2023 regular meeting, and the check register was shared at minute 12:33, and it I think you were in a very difficult situation, Dan, from what I saw. The former business manager was getting increasingly upset, saying she was in bizarro land, she was at a loss, like she felt like she was getting a lot of grief. And at 15:12, Dan, the co-chair, said, "Sorry, Bernadine, that you feel disrespected. That is not the intent." From what I witnessed, it was a difficult situation. I don't think, I'm glad it was not me in the hot seat there, but I didn't see anything that was trying to either suppress Bernadine's information of financial information that was crucial for the board to be considering at the time, or that was doing anything other than trying to proceed with important board business. And I will, there were many comments that it was a hot board meeting. There were a lot of attendees, and it was important, I think, to take control and to calm down the room pretty early, and we did. And then you also graciously accepted Carol's suggestion for a 5-minute break, and I think all of that worked, and we were able to proceed with the meeting.
Julia, can I ask a question?
Carol, I'm sorry, but you can't interrupt now. This is
fine.
Our turn to ask Dan questions.
That's fine. That was why I was asking.
Also, under this policy, there's an allegation here that that Dan disclosed confidential information from executive session. Dan, you are aware that information that we discuss in executive session is confidential. Is that correct?
I'm aware of that, yes.
It's been my experience being a participant in many executive sessions of late, that is something that is routinely reminded to us in those sessions by yourself and by Thad. I will just note, do you, what I notice, I'll note that the allegation here is that that the co-chair met with 2 union members, and then a teacher, not necessarily one of the union members that were met with, but another teacher announced the exact words that were only used in executive session to describe a recommendation of the board. To me, this seems highly circumspect, and lacks a lot of specificity. There were lots of other people in that executive session that occurred, and there is no evidence that there's nothing here that suggests that Dan was the one that shared something, and also the could be purely coincidental. There's no specificity here about which words and how many words, and so I have to say that, you know, in order to warrant an investigation, which I think is one of our options, should we feel that that's necessary, I would want some more detail rather than just this insinuation that the possibility that one person repeated words that were in an executive session should be attributed to Dan. Dan, do you have any comments on this allegation?
I didn't share the exec session information with the MTA. The allegation, the timeline of events in the allegation aren't accurate. I did meet with the MTA and jointly with Leah, our board member who was tasked with negotiations with me. We met on the 8th for contract negotiations, but I was at work on the 9th for a 36-hour shift in Portland.
Do other folks have thoughts on this executive session one? I mean, I take very seriously any allegation that information that was shared in executive session was shared out of that session, and I don't want to make light of that. At the same time, there's so little here. There is a teacher who did not meet with Dan, or at least doesn't appear so, who said words that were in an executive session. There were 7 of us board members at that time, plus an ED who were in attendance at that board session. So any one person could have shared the exact words, or it could have also been coincidental that similar words were used. It seems like a stretch at best.
Yeah, I mean, in my recollection of that board meeting was on the 6th, right? Yeah. June 6th. There was a publicly taken board vote after the board came out of executive session at the end of that meeting, for which the vote was not unanimous on board action. My recollection was that the board voted 6-1 to ask me to go consult with our ED about the performance evaluation. The recording's up on the net. There was a reason given for the no vote, as has been our long practice for no votes. And I think it's very likely that, you know, any concerns about exec session material were actually people filling in blanks and drawing conclusions from legally mandated public action on, you know, actions that we have to take and the results of a vote. Obviously, without more specifics, that's the only thing I can come up with as a reasonable explanation.
Now that you mentioned it, I will add to that after that executive session and the public vote, I had people texting me making assumptions about what had just occurred based on that vote, which I neither confirmed nor denied. But along these lines about what direction the board was headed. There is, I think this has been addressed also within this. I'd like to move on to the next policy, but within this policy is also the sharing of the check register. So the allegation is that Dan Watson shared his screen with the public in the board meeting of 6/12 with payroll information, and this went to Facebook, and that this was not required and invasive of staff privacy. I think we've discussed it. Salaries are public information, but I also think we appreciate the recommendation not to, when it's not necessary, share the check register, and I will take that to heart, and I think that that's not best practice, but not necessarily a violation of policy. Dan, do you have any thoughts or in response to that allegation?
I think it had been past practice of the board, and I just kind of continued it. But especially after that meeting, it being brought up, it's like, oh, this is not a good idea. I don't think it's something that we should continue to do. And, I certainly won't continue to do that. I think that, those really good points brought up about that.
Okay. Then the next, Avelia, Marie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to state that on June 12th, I was attending the meeting as a member of the public. I wasn't seated until midnight of that evening. And I had been listening in on school board meetings leading up to that date. And what struck me during that June 12th meeting, when the check register was shared, is that the business manager made a recommendation that it not be shared, and that Dan Watson obliged. And I was surprised to read in this complaint that his what seemed to me when I watched it, cordial, it seemed like a mistake. He recognized his mistake. And, I think it was a very wise recommendation. So I was a bit surprised to see this in the complaint. And I also witnessed the altercation. I did find that, it did seem that there were emotions running high. However, I did think that, and taking a break in those situations is wise. We're all parents of children. When things get out of hand, we need to step back and take a break. And that was what I witnessed.
Okay, I'd like to move to the next policy. We've got a few here. There's an alleged policy of our BBBDA board meetings. The policy is that generally a regular board meeting will be held each month. The regular meeting scheduled will be established at the organizational meeting in July and may be changed by the board with proper notice. And the allegation is that a meeting was not held in July 2022. The meeting schedule was not established until September 2022 and is not posted to the board website under board calendar. The action item listed on the calendar posted on the website were not adhered to this year in the following months: July, August, September, November, December, February, March, and April, therefore omitting action on many impactful issues, as in evaluation goals and review of the ED quarterly, review of board health and safety policies, annual board goals, committee assignments, and conducting a board self-assessment. The board calendar states goals, setting dates for the ED in June and quarterly reviews in September, December, and an evaluation in March. None of these were completed by the board chair or assigned to another board member. Under board meeting dates, the 2019-2020 meeting dates are posted and no current calendar is posted. Now, some of this has been discussed with questions to Carol around the July 2022 meeting. Do folks have questions for Dan? There's a fair amount there. in addition to the July 2022 meeting, to be clear. But we've also discussed the failure to adhere to some of the items that are suggested on the board calendar for these various dates. I will note that my experience being on the board with you as co-chair, Dan, has been that while certain things may not have happened precisely on the month, there is a great cognizance of the things that need to occur. For example, committee assignments, negotiating the MTA contract, approving a budget, doing an evaluation of the ED, and that all of these things have happened. They may not have happened on the month that the calendar suggests these things happen, but I think Thad and Dan did ensure that the essential items to running the school all occurred in that was my experience of this past year. The final thing is about an unfortunate document, and we did talk about this at the top of this meeting, that the board meeting dates for 2019-2020 are still up on our website, and that we don't have our regularly scheduled board meeting dates up. We have had this year practice of having our meeting on the third Tuesday unless otherwise noticed, but I would suggest to all of us that we update that document and make sure that our regular meetings are posted in a way that the public is aware of. My read of public, I'm at a loss for the word, of our responsibility in giving the public notice of our regularly scheduled meetings is that we are in compliance with giving a reasonable amount of time, and we have a practice of alerting the public 3 days prior or more of a regular scheduled board meeting, and that we have them monthly with the exception of July, as we've discussed. But I would suggest that we update this document.
Yeah, I think I've already spoken to this, but the practice of, it's been the case for several years now that largely because of individual board members' schedules through the summer not solidifying, and frankly different needs the schools had to fill in various summers, with COVID or hiring an intermediate a couple years ago. It's been often the case that we get to September before we have a calendar of meeting dates locked down. It's also been the case that we've often changed dates in September and even October, again, to accommodate making sure every board member can make every meeting and is afforded that opportunity. I agree, it would be better if we posted those meeting dates as soon as possible. I'd also just like to point out that the practice that we've had for several years of our meeting dates kind of solidifying over the course of a couple of months rather than in one meeting in July has been a practice that's largely taken shape under me as board chair, not Dan. And that if that's a problem, that requires discipline, that should be directed at me. I can also say that it's never once been raised to me as a concern in 5 years as a board chair, not one time. By a board member or a member of the public. As far as publishing agendas on time, I can't remember if maybe that's a separate policy.
That's the next one.
Okay, I'll save that.
There is an allegation here that none of the dates for the ED evaluation were met. I got a couple questions there. One question is whether the former ED ever asked for a meeting and made a request of you guys to meet that you guys denied.
No.
I can recall only one meeting where there was a request made to meet with each of us individually with another board member present. And I denied that request until it was modified. it took a day to reach resolution on that.
And was the ED's performance review completed in 2022 and in 2023, and those results shared with the ED?
Yes.
My recollection of this past year, I wasn't involved in 2022, but is that the ED's performance evaluation was delayed. But a large part of that delay was for similar reason that we didn't get the policies, perhaps from our former ED, was that the school entered a state of, well, just triage starting April 4th because we had a threat of violence, and that really consumed the board activity, ensuring safety of the students, and delayed several decisions there. I don't know if that seems correct to you, but that was my experience on the board.
Yeah, there was a lot going on that delayed all those things, and our former ED was aware of that.
I think it's important to note that we had a tremendous number of meetings and hours of meetings, and the ED wasn't in those meetings. But that a large proportion of my experience of why the ED's performance evaluation was delayed was that we were making decisions that were needed immediately to protect school and approve facilities, and to handle sort of an evolving situation. Any other questions on this policy of Dan? I'll just note again, you know, the fact that the board meeting date for 2019-2020 is still up is a, you know, that's a complaint that's, you know, from 2020. Those are stale and they've been up there for a couple of years. Just as an example of some of the items that it seems odd to me are coming to, are being complained of today, when there are, you know, that's an error that's years old.
And I'd just like to point out as well, just for anyone that might not be aware, I know the board's aware of this, but it's always our policy when we have a meeting to announce the meeting and publish an agenda, both to our entire foundation membership. So our foundation membership would be anyone that can vote in a school board election. The agenda and notice of the meeting is sent out via an email list that we have of all our foundation members. We also post the agenda and the intent to meet on the school's Facebook page. And we've done that historically. Those have been the ways in which we've announced public meetings, both regular and special meetings, since long before my time on the board. I know as a board chair, I have modeled that after what Susan Valley taught me when she was our executive secretary. We have since we lost Susan and did not hire another executive secretary to replace her, moved to using recorded minutes as a substitute for written minutes, a recording of the meeting. I did the research as board chair several years ago, or it was at least 2 years ago. It's during COVID, the beginning of COVID. It's probably 3 years ago now, to ensure that satisfied the Oregon State Attorney General's rules for minuting public meetings. And it does, in fact, a recording of the meeting. It could even be an audio recording. And having that publicly accessible does suffice. That was a board decision that passed unanimously about 3 years ago to move to that mechanism of minuting meetings. And ever since then, it's been our policy to post the recordings to Facebook. I do agree that it would be even better to do what we're doing now and post them to the links to the school's website, maybe to a YouTube channel. I would like to point out, though, that I cannot recall, if someone wants to point out that I've forgotten this, I'm more than happy to revoke this comment, but I cannot recall in my 4 years as board chair ever having a concern expressed to me about the recordings being on the school's Facebook page as a primary means of access. And I know I was able to go back today and within 30 seconds dial up recordings from years ago and reference them. But I do think that we should make them accessible to folks that either choose not to use Facebook or don't use it. You know, however, I don't think that, you know, Facebook is a public forum, so I don't think that having them only on Facebook for the last several years, I'd be surprised. I'm not a lawyer, but I'd be pretty surprised if that constitutes lack of public access. But again, I'd like to just point out that that was a unanimous board decision years ago to move to recordings. And if anyone needs to be held responsible for relying on this public Facebook page to publish those recordings, that should be me, not Dan. I set that precedent about 3 years ago.
I will say I'm able to get without logging into Facebook, you can access the meeting notes. It's not to say I don't prefer them being on YouTube, but I don't log into Facebook. I just Google Mosier Community School and it comes up. One, outcome here may be that we as a board recently had a training with OSBA with Kristen Miles, and we may want to have specifically a training on public or meeting law, or for Dan and myself as chair and vice chair now to meet with her specifically and go through in the way that we did with some guidance from D21, go through our notice of our meetings and make sure that we are in full compliance, and also the way we upload our minutes. Because a lot of this complaint is around those things. And so is the next item. And it seems like an area where maybe it's wise for a refresh, and just another set of eyes from the outside wouldn't hurt. The next policy is the board meeting agenda. It's policy BDDC, which states that the agenda together with supporting materials will be distributed by the public charter school office or the ED to board members at least 3 full working days prior to the meeting. The allocation that is one example. The agenda was sent to board members on Friday, June 9th, 2023 at 9:54 a.m. for the board meeting on Monday, the 12th of June at 5:30 p.m. That is 1 day and 7.5 hours notice approximately. This agenda fell on a Friday, and my read of the policy, the complaint here is that the emphasis is on the working days and having it's 3 days before the meeting, but to make the math work of 1 day and 7 hours, I think it's referencing the working day.
Yeah,
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I have a question. Is there a policy that states that voluntary board members are not required to work on the weekend? If it is, I'd like to know. I fully intend to work on weekends, but I would like to. I would like to know if OSBA has some kind of policy that states that, in emergency situations where needs need to be addressed, let's say there's a safety threat on a Friday, and the board needs to convene. Are we going against policy if we send out an agenda less than 48 hours in advance?
No. Our policies and public meeting law of the state of Oregon, and I believe also our bylaws, provide for special meetings to be conducted on 24 hours notice, publishing an agenda with 24 hours notice. And there's even a provision for emergency meetings on an ill-defined, not so clearly defined lesser notice. I think what's being referenced here is the supporting materials. So the agenda and the supporting materials for regular meetings of the board, which the June 14 meeting was a regular meeting.
Okay. And is there a distinction to be made between when school is in session, working days, or summertime when, how do we define as a board, if the school is on summer holiday, how do we define what are working days and what are vacation days not to be worked on?
It's a good question, Marie. I haven't looked at the policies to see if there's actually a definition of working days. My presumption is that that's weekdays. But we clearly had an exchange of which Carol was part of over the weekend on this very agenda. And I had read the email earlier about the request to include a facilities item on this agenda because Carol said that we weren't going to have most likely a July meeting. And this would be, I think, her last regular meeting with the board. So we continued to work on it over the weekend. I think the important part is being in compliance with public meeting law as far as giving reasonable notice of a regularly scheduled meeting to the public, which is our obligation. I have not experienced a pattern or practice of agendas being late or not having sufficient material as a board member to be able to discuss matters. I'd be curious, Dan, if you received, when Carol was on the board at this time, any complaints about the agenda being late at that time it was delivered, or that there was insufficient time to review materials, and if you took any corrective action.
No, I didn't. It's always a challenge for me with my work schedule to get the agenda out on certain days. So if I'm at work and I intend to get it out that day, but the day gets busy, it's not possible for me to do it. I'm just tied away with other emergencies. So, what's challenging a lot of times is to try to get it out to our secretary before the end of the school day. And so sometimes I've missed that mark, but I do my best to try and make those timelines.
I think wasn't this the meeting where the check register was showed, because it was an attempt to make sure that everybody had all of the material, because the agenda had been sort of late coming for a variety of reasons, and the facilities materials were also late, and so we had some screen sharing there in order for everybody to have and I think the incorrect document had been circulated on the facilities program by Carol, and so we needed a refresh on that. Is my memory of that particular meeting. I just point out, I think it's unfair for us to put all of for Dan to shoulder the full responsibility under our bylaws for getting the agenda out in a timely fashion. I take issue with whether or not this was an example of I don't see a pattern or practice of the agendas not being out in a timely way, in a way that gives reasonable notice to the public. But I also think our bylaws afford for that responsibility being not on the chair necessarily. I mean, the chair is supposed to initiate the process, but my understanding is it's actually the secretary who has the burden under the bylaws of making sure that if you look under the duties of the secretary, which is section 5.4, the secretary shall have overall responsibility for all record keeping and for notices to the board of any board meeting. And then, the language that Carol cited from the policies also makes clear that that's to be sent out by the ED and the charter school. So it's a duty that, assembling the items in the agenda may start with the co-chairs, Thad and Dan at that time. But then certainly the responsibility is shared by the board to make sure we have all of this information out for the public, in my mind. I'd like to move to the next policy item unless somebody has questions on the agendas.
Well, I'll just add that it's been our practice for as long as I can remember us having meetings on Tuesdays that we try to get the agenda out by the end of the day, Friday. And that practice has been based on a couple of things. One, and it's been the case for at least 2 years, possibly longer. I'd have to go back through my email and see when agendas actually got sent out for every single meeting, but it's been at least 2 years. The reasons for that are, number one, to accommodate, the approving the agenda, commenting, interacting with the board chair on the agenda, and producing a lot of the supporting materials, be it budgets or check registers or whatever, falls heavily on the staff. And we've historically tried to give the staff as long as possible. In this case, in this example, all the way till the end of the work week on Friday before they leave for the weekend, to put together their contributions for supporting materials. I believe it was me a couple years ago that actually kind of put the stake in the ground about Friday evening at the end of the school day being an appropriate time to get that out, because I felt it struck a good balance with expectations of staff and giving them as long as possible to produce collateral they needed to produce, and also recognize that board members work during the week, and actually are, from a board perspective, our working days are the weekend, and the time that we have to really work on reviewing materials is the weekend. And so getting those out Friday night gives us the entire weekend, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday if we need to during our work day, a full 3 days to review things. If the intent of that policy is to strictly define Monday through Friday as a work day, then that means that we'll have to turn up the expectations of staff to produce collateral much more quickly ahead of the meeting than we've done in the past. That the particular June meeting that was referenced in the complaint was indeed a very complicated one. That meeting it was originally scheduled for 13th of June, I think. And on the 6th of June, in a special meeting, the board there was a request made, because Dan and I both could not make the 13th, to change that meeting to the 12th. That was approved by the board on the condition that our business manager could make the meeting on the 12th, on Monday the 12th, because obviously one important part of that regular June meeting was to do a final reading of the budget. On that very evening of that June 6th meeting, where the board directed Dan to ask the business manager, he did indeed send an email, I was on copy with it, to our business manager. It was at about 9:35 p.m. after we got out of our June 6th meeting, asking if moving the meeting from Tuesday the 13th to Monday the 12th would be appropriate, and if that would present a challenge for having a budget ready. The response to that email was affirmative, that it would not be a problem and it should be fine. I can provide all these emails if need be. Agenda was published on Friday morning, as noted in the complaint that we're reviewing. And then between the time that agenda was published on Friday morning, in Friday evening, we got requests from multiple staff members to either cancel the meeting or remove items from the agenda. We got a request over the weekend to add a facilities item to the agenda. And we also had some very strong advice that I spent a lot of my weekend clarifying with our legal counsel to add an executive session to that agenda for the 12th to deal with some urgent matters. And so that did result in a modification of the agenda over the weekend that mostly removed items at the request of our staff members that asked for them to be removed. We removed the budget review, we removed the ED report, as well as I think as a couple other items. We added the facilities update on the request. I think with the facilities update, we added real time at the beginning of the meeting as a modification to the agenda. And it's my recollection that those things were all done in, to try to respect people's requests to modify the agenda, since, things turn out to be harder than they thought to be ready for Monday. But also to carry forward with the need to have the meeting as directed by legal counsel. So I just wanted to sort of provide that background information. And I also say that it is that my recollection that Dan was indeed in the midst of a multi-day shift during the development of that agenda, and I played a large role myself in assembling that agenda and also in making the modifications that occurred over the weekend before the meeting.
Well, and it seems like there might be a conflict here between the 3 days that things are supposed to go out. The supporting materials will go out to the board members. That's different than reasonable notice to the public, and it's its own timeline. And I think it seems the intent of the policy seems to be that all the board members have time to review this stuff. And given that it was over the weekend, and that all of us, and that school was out. To me, it does change and that there were no complaints brought, that there was insufficient time to review the materials, and that modifications were made actually to the meeting in order to ensure folks had all of the materials visible. All of that softens the impact of having this come on a Friday for a Tuesday meeting.
Yeah, I mean, if the intent of working days really is Monday through Friday, then yeah, we didn't publish it 3 working days ahead of the meeting. I'll point out that we probably haven't met, if it really is a strict Monday, has to be 3 Monday through Fridays, we haven't met that requirement for probably 2 years at least, because I've not personally had all the information provided to me to even be able to send it out that soon.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important to me is to make sure that you are working with the ED, whoever it is, and the staff to make sure that the agenda includes items that are important to the ED and to staff. And it sounds like that happened with this agenda, where things were actually removed because the business manager wasn't ready to present the budget and the other staff requests. So, and it's been my experience that the ED always has a report and an opportunity and space on the agenda to share information. So I don't think there's a question there, but that's just been my experience. I'm going to move to the next policy, if that's okay. We've got a few more here. This is about the minutes of the board meeting. It's policy BDDG. All minutes shall be available to the public within a reasonable time. The public and patrons of a public charter school may receive, upon request, copies of the approved current minutes at the executive director's office. The minutes need to be approved by the board prior to being available to the public, and a copy of the minutes of each regular and special board meeting as they are drafted for approval will be distributed after such meeting to each board member and the executive director. The public charter school will maintain and make available to staff and other interested patrons an updated copy of the meeting minutes. That's the policy. The allegation is that the most recent minutes posted on the MCS website are March 17th, 2020. In recent years, the meetings are recorded and are supposedly available on Facebook. There are no links posted on the website, and when I requested these, was told to look on Facebook, which is not an accessible site to all of the public, and attempting to find the recordings is futile. By contrast, D21 have the minutes posted on their website from their meeting on May 15th, 2023. This feels to me like it's been pretty discussed, and this particular issue, and also it is being currently addressed. I would again say that I think it's unfair for all of this to fall on Dan. This decision to have the meetings posted to Facebook occurred while Carol was on the board, I believe, or it certainly had been an ongoing practice while Carol was on the board. And it seems like we are all in agreement and recognize that having it on YouTube and per the advice of D21 is a better avenue and on our website. Do folks have any further questions about this one? Avelia?
Not a question, I guess. Again, just a regard to what you already mentioned, Julia. I understand Facebook can be, and having it access, I think that's something that we've been speaking in other meetings as well. But you don't necessarily have to have a Facebook account to be able to look at these videos. So they have been available throughout the whole time. I guess I just want to remark that once again, that they've always been available. You don't have to be a Facebook user to be able to see these.
Thanks, Avelia. I think for another time, a discussion also how we make this accessible to our school's Latino community is a good discussion, but it's not something here in the complaint, but I think something we need to be thinking about. I'm going to move to the next policy unless anyone would like to ask Dan a question or Dan would like to say anything. Dan?
I mean, we have been, I just want to make sure everyone's aware that we've been working with D21, our sponsoring district, to make sure that our website's up to date. The minutes are easily accessible, and that we, follow best practices and making sure they're accessible. We've already talked about that quite a bit here, and I'm looking forward to making sure that, we make any changes that are necessary. And I also just wanted to thank our school secretary for all the work that she's done to make changes after we talked to D21 about that. I think it's important that you know, that we acknowledge the work that she's done to make some quick changes to the website. I don't know how easy or hard it is to make those changes, but it can't be something that's very quick. So thank you.
Next policy is adoption and revision of policies. It's policy BFC. The policy manual will be reviewed at the beginning of each year to keep it current, is the policy. And then the allegation is the policy manual was given to new board members in August 2022. No policies were reviewed at that time, and no new policies have been read, reviewed, or adopted this year, 2022-2023. Therefore, it is not current. Ignoring policy reviews and not adopting new policies is in violation of this policy. It is an extremely important part of the board's job and leaves the school and the board directionless and open to lawsuits. When I brought this topic up, Dan has interrupted me and told me it's not relevant to the discussion. Policies are the basis for the board's governance in any issue. I'll just reiterate my experience, which we just discussed at the top of this meeting, which is that it was actually Dan that after our conversation with D21 that tracked down what was going on with our policy update subscription and unearthed that the policy updates have been sent to just one individual per the subscription. Only one person can have that email, and it was our former ED. I presume that person was also the person receiving the updates in 2022. I don't know for sure, but I do know that the policy update suggestions were sent by OSBA to our former ED on March 31st of this year, and were not presented to the board to my knowledge, although we have them now. Do folks have questions? I fully agree here with the complainant that our policies need to be updated, and that it does put the school at risk not to have the policies up to date. There are important changes to the policies, absolutely, and some of the ones, as I mentioned, that were emailed to our former ED were marked as highly important. So I look forward to addressing those, and I think that we need to really be cognizant of whoever our next ED is or our current lead administrator, that they bring those to us immediately, and that those not languish in an inbox, because they are important. I don't see any action here that Dan took in particular as co-chair that was somehow ignored the policy updates or failed to incorporate them. I do think, perhaps I did receive all the policies. I have my handbook from and I use it frequently, as well as the school's online policies. But I do think that this is something that we, as a whole board, need to be doing.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and I think that's reflected in the action we took earlier in this very meeting for me to take the responsibility to go look through the recommended policy updates and have that ready to present to the board at our August regular meeting. I agree we need to look through the recommended updates and get up to date. I don't think that it's fair to shoulder that responsibility just on Dan. The last new policy we adopted was at the very end of 2020, 2.5 years ago. That was the All Students Belong policy that got rolled out by OSBA. So it's been, 2.5 years. It includes a significant part of my tenure as board chair. That time also spanned a very difficult time for MCS with COVID, and coming back to in-person learning. So I think it's definitely time to get up to date on that. I wouldn't personally be comfortable with putting the responsibility for failing to update our policies for the last 2.5 years on Dan.
Any questions, or Dan, anything you'd like to say there before I move to the next policy? Evaluation of the executive director. This is policy CBG. Anytime the executive director's performance is deemed to be unsatisfactory, the director will be notified in writing of specific areas to be remedied and will be given an opportunity to correct the problems. I will omit in the allegation here a few words just for the reasons that I announced at the ground rules at the beginning. The allegation is that the director has not been notified of any unsatisfactory performance, has not been notified of any specific areas to be remedied, and has been given no opportunity to correct any problem. Nothing has been put in writing. No unsatisfactory performance has been documented by the board chair, nor has any opportunity been given to correct any problems before the discussion of non-renewal of her contract. Dan Watson has not met with the ED between September 22nd and May 23rd to discuss school business. I'm going to ask the question again, Dan. Were there any requests for a meeting by the ED that you denied?
No.
And then I think it's important here that you two are co-chairs and that the bylaws allow for delegation between the co-chairs. I don't want to make any presumptions or characterize a relationship, but if the ED were more comfortable having conversations with one chair over the other chair, that to me seems like it would be appropriate. And so that any evaluation of the ED should fall on both chairs. Did Thad or Dan, did either of you meet with Janet between September 22nd and May 23rd? This says that there is not a single meeting to discuss school business.
No, I met, I mean, it depends on how you define meeting, multiple in-person meetings, many more phone conversations. I mean, I haven't documented every one of them, but there's been many meetings through September to December. And then for me personally, a lesser number of those in January and on, because, of course, I was out of town January and February. But yeah, many meetings. Some of those were requested of me and some were impromptu, phone calls or even dropping in at the school.
My experience of the school is that it's actually we're a very intimate board with our administrator in a way that may not be typical. We have a small school, a small community, a small board. We all have each other's cell phones, emails, and see each other face to face on a pretty regular basis, coming or going from the school. It surprises me that there's a complaint about not meeting at all, and I also think the committee meetings and the board meetings, which are regular and attended by both the ED and board members, are another opportunity where school business is discussed. And there's an exchange of information. And this seems like it's specific to having a private conversation. So on that point of just not meeting to discuss school business, I think there are 2 points here. And then the other point is about any unsatisfactory performance. And I would just caution us all to proceed with caution. Those sorts of conversations about ED performance are typically held in executive session and so can't be discussed here. But we certainly did have executive sessions noticed to discuss ED performance, is my recollection. It does seem like where one area that did not happen in quite the, in the formal way that the calendar suggests it should was the quarterly ED evaluations. Does that seem right?
Yeah, it is. And I can't, honestly, in my 5.5 years on the board, I don't think I've ever seen quarterly evaluations done. So that precedent definitely started before me, if not with me. If you know, there were some quarterly check-ins my first year on the board, before I was a chair. I wouldn't call them evaluations because they were all done publicly. So yeah, this is a tough one to talk about because, you know, we can't really talk about performance related conversations in public forum. So
yeah. I will say, you know, we did do a performance evaluation, and as the complainant has pointed out, the timeline, by the time that information was provided, there was not sufficient time for the problem to be remedied. Unfortunately, that conversation, for the reasons we discussed, was not had in March, per the calendar, but in early April, we had a threat of violence to the school, and we're all working very hard on that, and that got pushed. So I see some delay, and an unfortunate delay in that feedback. There was other feedback in a school's climate survey, which was conducted, and I think the ED did receive those results. Do you both as co-chairs know? The ED did get the climate survey results. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay. Other questions on this point? I mean, I would agree that I think that the you know, ideally, if per the policy, you know, if the performance is lagging, there should be an opportunity to correct that. It does seem like there was a written performance evaluation that was provided to the ED. Unfortunately, under the contract, there was not really time to remedy those problems. And that written performance evaluation was delayed for the reasons that we've discussed in 2023. There were other meetings about performance. I do think we as a board should try, for the success of the school and for the benefit of everyone, that this policy makes good sense to me. You know, when there's a problem, to have an opportunity to remedy it. I just think it's unfortunate that the timing of the performance evaluation was so close to the end of the contract. I want to be clear that the former ED was not terminated. So we didn't cut short a contract based on a performance evaluation that there was no time to remedy, but rather that the contract ran out and there was a decision not to offer a new contract. To me, those are different situations. If we as a board had decided to terminate the ED based on a critical performance evaluation and not afforded an opportunity for that ED to remedy the situation, I think that would be in violation of this policy. It seems like a different situation. Any further questions of Dan on this one? All right, there's a summary of concerns, and then that's the end of this complaint. So thank you all for hanging in there. Dan Watson has not received any board training from OSBA that is known to the board, has not taken any trainings on board chair responsibilities, has not taken the OSBA onboarding training for board chairs, and is deficient in his duties as board chair. He has consistently shown bursts of temper in dealing with staff members and a board member. Dan has violated a minimum of 6 policies, some more serious than others, but due to his inability to follow correct procedures and policies, Dan has put the school in disarray, in legal jeopardy, and overturned its stability. Dan Watson was fully responsible for the business manager's resignation due to the relentless pressure he placed on her, his random and untimely requests of her, his lack of organization, and his rudeness to her in a public meeting. Bernadine is the single best business manager the school has ever had, and his treatment of her is abhorrent. Dan Watson has relentlessly pursued the executive director, Janet Carter, and has led the board in considering not renewing Ms. Carter's contract. This after a 20-year exemplary career with near perfect scores on her evaluation in 2022. At this time, Mrs. Carter has not been offered a contract for 23-24 with 15 days before her contract ends. The result of this leaves the school without an executive director, without a business manager, without current policies, with an untrained board, and consequently the school in complete chaos. District 21 may be considering charter violations. It is 6 weeks before the start of the new school year, and Dan Watson, as co-chair, has put the school in this untenable and precarious position. Considering these facts, Dan Watson is also capable of continuing as chair or as a board member. Considering these facts, Dan Watson is not capable of continuing as chair or as a board member and should be removed. I would like this to be discussed in public session in the next board meeting, as this is a timely matter and cannot be ignored or delayed. Mrs. Carter has given permission for the letter to be discussed in public session. Carol Deerholt, June 14th, 2023. I think this is mostly a summary. I'm trying. Do folks have questions for Dan?
Dan, do you think that as a board, all of these complaints could be looked at as more valuable suggestions that we try to work together to ameliorate?
Yeah, I agree.
Do you, I've been working with Kristen Miles to organize the meetings. The next meeting would be once we have two, well, hopefully we'll have 2 more board members joining us. And Kristen Miles and I have discussed setting up a training for those 2 new members that we all just had in July, so that they can be brought up to speed. And then moving forward, we would design a training that would be I'm sorry. Catered to our needs as a school. Would you willingly agree to do that?
I would, and I want to thank you for taking the time and effort to really reach out and set those trainings up. You know, I really appreciate your work on that. I look forward to the next training. I want to continue to get better. You know, I don't pretend to be a professional board member or a professional board chair. I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm always going to try to present a better board meeting every month, and you know, I'll remain focused on our school's success and the success of our children and the families that we serve.
Thanks. And to the rest of the board members and moving forward, I think that, you know, it would be great if we set the tone where we really see in one another, you know, a willingness to do the best that we can, that we make mistakes, and that we proceed with humility. When we make mistakes, we acknowledge them and we correct them. A lot of these complaints to me seem unsubstantiated and counterproductive. I think they could have been sent as suggestions, especially coming from someone who has so much experience. And I really hope that we can proceed, you know, not when mistakes are made, not trying to find malice or denigrate. I just like to say that.
I'd like to recognize the extraordinary amount of work that I've recognized Dan contribute to the school in the last couple of months. I mean, it's just been a huge job. I have a tremendous amount of appreciation for the amount of effort and work that Dan has put in. I have attended meetings with Dan. I have attended training, OSBA training with Dan. I have watched Dan negotiate the MTA contract. I have watched Dan hold a community forum on school safety and just commit to staying there as late as everybody needed. I have talked to Dan about how long our board meetings run, and Dan has expressed his desire not to silence anyone and to make sure that everybody gets time to air what they need to air. I just think there are a lot of important rules, regulations, policies, bylaws. Some of them are conflicting, has been pointed out in this meeting, and we are a relatively young board. I admit all of those things. I think it's incredibly important that we accept complaints like the one that was filed, that we listen to them, that we take them seriously, and that we learn from them. And I think Carol makes some good points here. I do wish some of them had been raised earlier and while she was on the board. You know, if somebody had alerted me earlier about Facebook, I certainly would have changed that months ago. But we are acting now on many of these fronts. I'd say almost all of them. And some of that action predates this complaint and some of it doesn't. You know, I welcome the rest of the community to alert us to any needs. And I'm, you know, thinking just sort of on our feet about making this more accessible to our Latino community, for example, and whether or not these Zoom meetings are working for folks, and how we can be a better board and more inclusive. I don't see anything here to me that rises to the level of needing additional investigation, a third-party outside investigator. I don't see a dispute of facts. But you all correct me if I'm wrong or if you disagree. I do think, and I think it's my overarching concern with the complaint is that it places the blame for many things that fall on other individuals or fall on us jointly as a board or fall on both chairs on one individual, and it comes across as a personal attack on that individual. In a moment when the board was headed a direction that an outgoing board member disliked. And so it's using the complaint process in a way that I think is inappropriate. That said, I take each of these items seriously. And I would very much, Marie, appreciate some continued OSBA training. I think particularly our public meeting law and our ED evaluation process are the two things that rose to the top to me in this complaint. As being areas where this board could do better and be more rigorous, and just make sure that we are in full compliance. And I think Kristen is the perfect person to help us in those areas. Yeah, I think that's what I have to say. My gratitude to you, Dan, for the incredible amount of work you've been putting in. I really am so grateful. It is a volunteer position, folks, and it takes a tremendous amount of time and effort. And it takes someone that can work really well with people, that can handle very hot situations in hot rooms. It is not an easy job, and it's a pretty thankless one. And then to be brought into this sort of public complaint process over things like a document being posted from 2020 can be pretty demoralizing. And I just think Dan has handled. When I went back and I spent hours on this as well, and I've gone and reviewed old board meetings. I have reviewed old emails. There were allegations, that Dan has just put unreasonable demands on folks or been rude to folks, but I found again and again just an incredible amount of professionalism and grace and an attempt to always assume the best in folks. So I think my suggestion for the board is that I would suggest that we not make a recommendation to the foundation here, which is our one sort of avenue for if we wanted to unseat a director. I have no desire to unseat Dan based on any of the complaint items. That said, I would strongly encourage us all to have Marie proceed with some public meeting law and ED evaluation training from Kristen Miles and anything else that comes up, and would be happy to have Kristen Miles just, review the complaint and make suggestions as well.
I support all those things.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm committed to making sure that as a board, we work with Kristen Miles, the OSBA, to make sure that we're in compliance and make transparency a priority. We can't have accountability without it. So it's of the utmost importance that we do so. And I think that moving forward, that's part of the vision is to make transparency and accountability something that, hopefully, folks in our community, our parents won't question. And we also, I'm going to talk about humility once again, because it's a very important characteristic that board members need to have. We can't have accountability if we can't recognize our mistakes. And so I hope that, we can foster an environment where when mistakes are made, we don't have to put one another down. We talk about the mistake and we talk about the solutions and what we have to do to correct those mistakes, and we move forward and we all grow together. So that is my commitment to this board, and I will work diligently with Kristen Miles and all of you, and I see in all of you a willingness to move in that direction, which really I'm very excited to be part of this board. And I would love to know about the term working days, because I've only been on the board since June 12th of 2023, but it certainly seems to me that when you are on a school board, every day is a working day. I'm sure anybody who's ever been on a school board will agree with that. I appreciate, all of what Carol has laid out, because it's going to help me in my work, working with Kristen Miles to make sure that we, don't make any serious policy violations in the future. And as a new board member, I know very well that I could make a mistake, and I want to be sure that I don't. So this kind of provides to me the silver lining in complaints, and when they come forward, is that they create a roadmap of what needs to be addressed and what needs to be avoided. So I do appreciate complaints. And as Kristen Miles pointed out in our July 9 meeting, conflict is not a problem, it's combat. So as long as we can maintain an environment where we can discuss problems, discuss conflicts, disagreements in an environment where everyone feels like they have a voice and they can be heard, and they have the ability to correct themselves or an action. I think we're working for a school here, and that's what we tell kids is practice makes progress. We all make mistakes. Mistakes are what make us better. So, thank you, Carol, for your, taking the time to write your complaint. We will take this information, and I will see to it that we grow as a board and become, the best board that we can be.
I agree with what the board has said here. I guess I just want to add and thank Dan for all the work that he's done, hours and ability to even just, he's been an amazing person to just go back and talk to and feel a little bit more comfortable and confident of what I, for myself, am doing and trying to help for the school. It's not an easy, it's very long hours of work, but it's very worth it. And we're here to make the school a really great place. And I'm really excited with the board members that we currently are. So thank you.
I'm curious about how to conclude this. Thad, I wonder if we need a motion and a finding that no policies were violated or corrective action is being currently taken. So I see no policy violation of the standard of conducts of the board meeting generally being held. The one that there's a question about is that working days, the 3 days, whether there's a policy violation there by sending, and then the corrective action is being taken on the minutes of the board meeting policy, the adoption and revision of policies, corrective action is currently being taken. An evaluation of the ED, similarly, I think a corrective action is being taken. So I just wonder how we address these or wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are that, well, I'll just make a motion, and then if people feel uncomfortable with it or we want to modify it, we can modify it in line. But I'll move that the board vote to include this hearing, this particular complaint, seeing no reason to take disciplinary action or make a recommendation to our foundation membership against Director Watson. But the board do commit to some things we've already done, but things we're also, already committed to in this meeting, to renew our policies for first review in the August regular meeting, to clarify some potential conflict between our bylaws and policies that came up in today's meeting, and to empower and ask Marie to work with Kristen Miles on OSBA training, not to be limited to, but to definitely include tightening up our executive director evaluation process, as well as what was the other thing?
Public meeting law.
Public, just general public familiarity with public meeting law.
I'll second that motion. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, this concludes the first complaint. We have one more complaint, folks. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and then we will be hearing the complaint from our former business manager, who is not in attendance today, but has given me a written comment to read at the top of the complaint. We'll be back in 5.
Oof.
All right, everybody, we're back and I'm going to keep us moving. The next complaint to be heard is also against our co-director or former co-director now, sorry, former co-chair, currently chair, Dan Watson. And this is from our former business manager, Bernadine Hurley, and it was filed on 6/11/23. Bernadine's unable to make it tonight, but I asked that I read her comment at the top, which I will do, and then we will dive into the complaint. To the MCS Board of Directors, thank you for hearing my complaint. Unfortunately, I'm away this week and I'm unable to join the meeting remotely. I've included a brief comment to offer additional context and background. I'm a Mosier resident and an MCS parent. My son has been at the school for 6 years. I have served on the board for 3 and as a business manager for just over a year. In my time at MCS, I've interacted with 5 different executive directors and many board members. This is the first time I have filed a complaint. The complaint presented to you indicates 3 separate examples that are meant to illustrate an ongoing pattern of misconduct on the part of Director Watson. This pattern has continued since I initially filed the complaint on June 11th, up to and including Director Watson's attempt to have my individual school email account forwarded to himself. Director Watson has failed to guide this board in a manner consistent with school values and continues to ignore the boundaries that ensure the board is able to govern objectively and fairly. His behavior is a misuse of his position and threatens the operations of Mosier Community School. Per the school bylaws, this constitutes grounds for removal either by the board or a vote of the foundation membership. Thank you for your time, Bernadine Hurley. Dan, do you have anything you want to say at the top, or should I go through? There are, I would say, 3 allegations in this complaint. So we'll go through the 3 the way we did with Carol.
I'll just have you go through it, and then that way we stay on track.
That sounds good. So let me just bring up my notes. I'll say the school has a complaint form. Bernadine used the complaint form. And so I'll read the headings of the different sections of the complaint form. The first one is the nature of the complaint. This is a complaint against MCS board co-chair Dan Watson. Mr. Watson has repeatedly misused his position on the board and engaged in behaviors that threaten the operations of Mosier Community School. Then the next heading is who should we talk to and what evidence should we consider? I don't believe she offers anyone we should talk to, but the evidence we should consider is, and there are 3 paragraphs, and we will address them one at a time is my suggestion. So in April, he exposed the school to potential litigation by approaching Mosier Manor and demanding that the person who made the Facebook threat be evicted from their home. He announced his action at an all-staff meeting, which he was attending as a board member, yet stated that he did so as a parent, and that's in quotes, as a parent. Should someone choose to litigate, they could make a strong case that Mr. Watson was acting on behalf of the school. So just to remind the board, this was in the context of the school received 2 threats of violence on April 4th, gun violence. One of those threats of violence came from a resident at Mosier Manor. I think that was well known in the community. And the allegation here is that Dan, acting as a parent, contacted Mosier Manor, demanding that the person who made the Facebook threat be evicted from their home, and that this opened the school up to potential litigation or liability. Folks have questions for Dan? Any thoughts on this one? Marie?
Yes, are we, is the meeting, the listening session that the board had with parents, which included Sheriff McGill and other law enforcement, are we talking about that meeting?
Yeah.
I believe the meeting she's referencing was the after that meeting on a listening day with staff. But I discussed this both then and during the open listening session with the community.
Okay, because I do remember the subject of Mosier Manor being discussed. However, my recollection is that Mosier Manor had been approached to be made aware and to see if there was anything they could do to help. And it's also my understanding that individuals who pose a threat, you know, there are certain conditions. So I don't remember you making that statement in that meeting. But is this a meeting that took place was that different than the staff and parent meeting?
It was different. Yeah, it was a listening session that was with all staff at the school. And it was mostly just a day that was going to be a day of classes and normal school, but we opted to have it be a day for healing at the school for staff, and a day for just questions and seeing where they were at, more just to help them overcome whatever they needed that day.
Dan and Thad, has any litigation been brought against the school regarding Dan's actions of calling Mosier Manor?
Not that I'm aware of.
Is any other complaint? I guess I don't know what complaints been filed that we are aware of about this incident.
No.
I seem to recall that the discussion around Mosier Manor was purely coming from a place of concern, and I remember Dan's tone that in that parent listening session where all community members were invited was you know, a tone of concern. So I find it surprising that,
yeah, I'm struggling a little, Marie, too, because I find it there, you know, Carol's complaint listed a policy and then a violation, an alleged violation. Here it's unclear what the law or policy violation would be. But I went through the policies. Policy BBF requires that a board member comply with public ethics law, but it also recognizes the right of a personal opinion. And it says that a public charter school board member has the right to express personal opinions, but when expressing such opinions in public, the board member should clearly identify the opinions as personal. The allegation here itself concedes that Dan expressed his opinions around Mosier Manor and calling Mosier Manor as personal ones. I would have concerns here if Dan was representing a position that the board had taken, or using his title as co-chair in a way that was inappropriate in order to sort of influence outside things, or you know, somehow seeking personal gain. But I don't see an allegation here that Dan acted on behalf of the board without the board's permission, or represented that he was acting on behalf of the school by calling Mosier Manor, but rather that he was clear, as the complaint itself notes, that he was calling as a parent, and that he was not acting on behalf of the board. That's my thoughts on this one, and that's sort of where I focused was, again, it's a little bit of a challenge because there is no active litigation, and it's not clear what there's no law or policy identified. So I did my best to try to figure out. I think the overarching concern is in any behavior that might seem reckless or put the school at risk. I don't see a phone call to Mosier Manor. Well, I don't know, Dan, do you want to say anything about what you asked Mosier Manor? Or when it says here you approached Mosier Manor.
Yeah, I just called them. I didn't go over there or anything, but I called to inquire about their code of conduct, and I called as a parent and just wanted to see what the code of conduct was for the community, and if how that relates to these threats against the school and against our kids. They stated that they're aware of the threats, and they were in talks with their owners about what to do. I mean, I see how it could be negatively viewed, but I just was trying to ensure the safety of my kids at school. And I don't know, I think like all of us, we're all just completely blown away and had our safety bubble shattered that day.
Yeah, that's what I took away from the parent staff meeting, and I myself as a parent would have done the same. So I just don't see. I feel like this is being used against Dan as a personal attack, and really just missing the mark that this is a concerned individual who called because this was a serious threat, and as we needed information, parents, community members, and I don't know.
I will say one, as we're thinking about trainings with Kristen Miles, there are a couple of references to the board members having to comply with public ethics law. And I'll admit, I don't know all of the public ethics laws. I've reviewed our policies on sort of our fiduciary duties and not accepting gifts, and but there may be something there to how we present ourselves in the community and how we walk this line of having personal opinions and being on the board. It's not something I know the exact answer to. I don't see anything here that warrants action or that has put the school at risk or the school current being at risk or evidence that it is at risk. And there's no ask here to talk to anyone further or for further investigation. And it doesn't seem like there's a dispute of the facts. So I would be inclined to move to the next allegation, if that's all right with folks. Mr. Watson has also used his position to enter into agreements without board sanction and promote his own fiscal agendas, from benefit structure to investment policies. He entered negotiations with the MTA with a personal goal to make our, this is in quotes, make our pay the best in our region, end quote, and subsequently offered the MTA a 4% COLA, despite knowing this would put the school into a budget deficit. Again, this seems to be an allegation about an ethical violation that he's got his own fiscal agendas. But I don't see a fiscal agenda here that's meant to benefit Dan in any way personally. I see an agenda to increase our pay for our teachers, which is the allegation, but I don't see any problem with that as a personal goal. There's only one example here. There's some broad language. The one example is of negotiating the MTA contract with a 4% COLA. I don't see anything that strikes me as wildly unreasonable about a 4% COLA, given the current inflation rate and what most employers are offering these days. It seems totally in line and reasonable. Nothing that would raise an eyebrow. I think in most contexts, a 4% increase in pay given inflation right now. And this was something that we specifically actually discussed in our meeting with the district and to make sure that this was not going to, wasn't wildly out of line. And this was also negotiated with another board member. So not just Dan alone. Do you have thoughts that I think you're the most at your fingertips as far as this putting the school in a budget deficit? My understanding from talking to Bernadine is that she had suggested perhaps a 3% COLA, and then an additional percentage was about $20,000 in the budget. When I think about the facilities things we've approved recently for school safety, each one of those, the 20,000, it just seems like a bit of a drop in the bucket compared to the sum of all of those projects. But the allegation here is that this puts the school, this action alone puts the school in a budget deficit.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I just not to spend too much time restating what you've already stated, but the board has always made it a practice to appoint two board members, not one, to negotiate in good faith with the MTA about anything, whether it's a CBA change or a pay change. That sort of has obvious built-in protections against any one board member, being able to privately sort of influence the result. And then, of course, that negotiating team makes a recommendation to the board, which the board can then ultimately approve or disapprove. We did look at that suggestion in the context of a full annual budget in our regular June meeting. I think I shouldered the burden to present that budget, or the bulk of it, and we did approve a deficit budget for next year, but the context of that deficit is really important. And the primary reason for our deficit next year, as we talked about at length in our regular June meeting and is easily accessed via recordings for anyone that wants to go verify the facts, is a precipitous decline in our enrollment this year to next year. Enrollment is the main determining factor for funding. We were very honest with ourselves about that in our budget analysis. The other things that contributed most heavily to budget deficit for this upcoming year are significant expenditures on our facilities to improve our safety. So, approximately $50,000 for security fencing around the entire campus, another 40 or 50,000 for more secure doors, potentially a security guard. But I'd like to point out that and the board did approve a deficit budget for next year, but I'd like to point out a couple of really important contextual things there. Julia's right that extra, the initial first reading, the budget that was presented in May was assuming a 3% COLA, and it's always been practice of the school, because we have to start looking at the budget before we finish negotiations, to just assume a conservative number usually. We landed at 4%, and the difference in that is, I think, about $30,000, somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000. To put that in contrast, we're finishing the projections that we last looked at a few weeks ago for this current year end, that we're going to finish this year with well over $200,000 left that we didn't spend, that will carry over to next year. Coincidentally, that amount we have left this year just about exactly covers all the facilities related projects that are largely defining the deficit for next year. So if we look at our budget for next year in a vacuum, this is just 1 year, it is a deficit budget to a significant amount. But if you look at it over 2 years, it's actually not a deficit, because we're just using the money we didn't spend this year to cover the deficit next year. To speak to the enrollment issue, that money gets paid back on a 2-year cycle. We talked about that at length. We talk about it every single year in budget cycles. And we have a healthy budget enrollment reserve that the board, through very good stewardship over all the years I've been on the board, has set aside of about $180,000 to cover those things. And the express reason we've done that as a board is so we don't have to make knee-jerk emergency reactions to staffing or staff pay because of year-to-year changes in our enrollment, right? So a lot of charter schools would not have the specific reserves to cover these things that we have. We do have them. And, we discussed this at length, and the board made the decision, not Dan, to keep the status quo on paying our staff what they should be paid. I think with the very good intention of using the funds that we've put aside through good stewardship to keep that stability in our staffing, so that we can get our enrollment back up, and also so that we can do right by the kids that are enrolled in the school next year. Nothing's going to be worse for our enrollment or our operations next year if we have to make a bunch of wacky cuts to pay or staffing because of a 1-year blip in enrollment, when we have more than enough money in the bank. I think we have pretty close to a full year's operating budget. I'm using that term very roughly, in the bank. And that's a pretty significant financial reserve for a charter school to have. To quote our former business manager, Linda, when she and I used to talk about this kind of stuff, you try really hard as an individual or as a school to kind of build a rainy day fund, and then when it rains, you use it. You don't sit on it. we're experiencing some rain right now in the form of security threats and needs to upgrade, our facilities for security reasons, as well as, HVAC and, some of that stuff. And to keep stability in our staffing while we work through some enrollment challenges like a lot of schools are. So, but that just provides a lot of background, because it bothers me that, the deficit budget was mentioned, but none of the background. I did interact with Bernadine multiple times on the phone about the budget throughout the budget development process, including the day that the final 4% COLA was arrived at. And at no time was a concern about that number putting the school in financial distress ever raised to me. In fact, this complaint being filed was the first I was aware that it was a problem, even after I'd had very recent direct discussions on the budget as I helped work through developing it, as I have done all the years I've been board chair. So sorry if that's a bit long-winded, but I feel like context when we talk about deficits is really important, because they can mean a lot of different things to different schools depending on what their financial situation is. And Mosier School has done a really great job over the years of setting ourselves up to be fortunate enough to be able to do what we're doing now.
Thank you, Thad. I'll just reiterate, I don't see any allegation here that Dan is, his own fiscal agenda is anyway benefiting him personally, but this is all motivated by, he may have a personal view of what is best for the school, and that may come in higher compensation for our teachers, and others may disagree, but I don't see that as a violation of policy or law or bylaws, and we all have our own opinions coming into the board and are motivated by different factors that we're motivated to work on at the school. So and
I'd like to finally just briefly point out that the contract we just approved of that 4% COLA is a 1-year contract. We typically do 2 years. It's got, provisions to renegotiate that COLA a year out from now. I think, to me, to support like a allegation of a personal financial agenda would have to be coupled with like some ridiculous 10-year commitment or 5-year commitment to do, guaranteed COLA raises forever, something like that. I see every attempt here to make sure the board has an opportunity to revisit year to year, based on our own financial situation and what makes sense for the school. This doesn't tie our hands in a way that we just can't possibly do that, even 1 year from now, which I think is a really responsible way to balance, our short-term and long-term concerns.
my understanding is that there were other benefit asks that were not approved at this budget round, and we're sort of on for additional benefits. So there was a give and a take. I'm going to move on to the next one unless anyone has a question or Dan wants to say something. The third paragraph is that he has further exposed the school to risk by reprimanding an employee for not hiring the plumbing company owned by a fellow board member, violating public procurement rules, and overstepping the bounds of board authority. This didn't have a lot of information. I did, and it's fairly vague about what employee was reprimanded and the plumbing company. I did ask Dan for more detail on this one, and I was forwarded an email chain, which I think it would be helpful to share with the board if you can find it. Dan may want to give us more background, or that, or others who are more intimately involved in this whole process. But as folks are aware, Dan did work on the facilities committee, and I think is in the facilities committee loop on emails. There was this board approved, and I don't have the meeting in front of me of which meeting it was, Camps Plumbing to do the work on the annex building, which is the east side of our school property. That vote was taken, and Cindy Camp, who is a board member, abstained from the vote and the discussion of that vote. And then at some point, there was another plumbing company that became engaged on that project. And Dan or Thad or anyone who knows more about this, feel free to correct me if I say anything incorrect. I have an email chain about the other plumbing company, Two Dogs Plumbing, working on at the site. Dan emailed in a chain about that Two Dogs Plumbing working there and some of the concerns they were finding with the water. Dan emailed on May 31st. Is there a backflow valve installed at the meter or at the building? Shouldn't we ask our plumbing contractor for guidance and not whoever Carl decided to hire on his own? How would the water be contaminated? Don't we have all new plumbing? ? Thanks, Dan. And then there's a response from the business manager who was on this thread. Dan, hey, Dan, respectfully, this response is really out of line. Carl made a judgment call and hired a fully qualified plumbing company, which was within the scope of work we'd given him. The snide comment to the group is unnecessary and frankly only adds to the borderline conflict of interest we already have with the board, Cindy, and camps. Dan responds, I appreciate your feedback. I find it concerning that we are continuing to guess at what the best course of action is rather than use our contracted plumber, which it seems is costing us more money. I didn't intend for the comment to be snide, but in line with what had already been stated by someone else on the facility group that Carl had gone rogue again. Thank you, Dan. And what I point out for this is that we had approved one plumbing company. Suddenly a new company is working on the site. And I think Dan is asking very reasonable questions, in my opinion, about why we're not using the contracted plumber that the board approved. And it seems like his concern is coming from keeping this cost down. That he states, it seems as why are we not using, I find it concerning that we're continuing to, that we're not using the contracted plumber, which it seems is costing us more money. So to me, this all seems very reasonable. I didn't see anything snide in the questions that Dan asked. Is there a backflow valve installed? Shouldn't we ask the contracted plumber for guidance? And how would the water be contaminated? Don't we have all new plumbing are the questions. And then when he gets what seems to me like a much more snide email in response, accusing him of a conflict of interest and writing a snide comment, his first response is, I appreciate your feedback. So overall, I think I don't have, I don't know if there was additional communication. This is the written communication. Nothing further was provided here in the evidence or any suggestion to talk to anybody else. This, I think, is what's being referenced when it says reprimanding an employee for not hiring the plumbing company owned by a fellow board member. So that I just offer that context so the board knows kind of what the situation was. Anybody have questions for Dan, or Dan, do you want to add anything further?
No, I think it's pretty clear. I asked that we use the company that we already paid for and not hire another company and cost more money. I didn't understand. I don't think I had all the emails on everything. I was just looped in on that one chain that you saw, and I haven't been a part of the facilities for a while. And so part of it was just like, why are we doing this? Why aren't we just going with who we already paid to use?
Yeah, I'm disappointed because at face value, the way the complaint reads, I mean, it's pretty serious. Reprimanding an employee for not hiring the plumbing company owned by a fellow board member. That's a pretty serious allegation. I'm disappointed that it leaves out so much context. I mean, the board deliberated on and approved the only company that bid on all that plumbing work on the east side property. We could only get one company to bid on it. And the board, not Dan, approved that vote or that contract, and they were contracted to do the work. And then it seems to me that what Dan was doing was asking why, before that work was 100% completed, we were engaging yet a different plumber that didn't, to my knowledge, I don't remember any other plumber being brought before the board for approval. Not that the board has to approve everything, you know, every bit of work that's ever done anywhere, but you know, I'm mostly disappointed in how the complaint is represented here, because I think it really leaves out a lot of context, and at face value is very serious, but when the facts are kind of all laid out, not so much.
I don't have it at my fingertips. I do think we have some obligation over contracts, and that it's reasonable for us to be concerned if there's a new contract, and then our duties in the bylaws is also to oversee all assets, business affairs, and properties of Mosier Community School. So these questions seem fully in line with, you know, not outside of the duties and responsibilities of a board member.
Yeah. I agree.
So the suggested solutions, resolution, and outcome here on the complaint form is that Mr. Watson should be removed from the board, and all remaining board members should be required to engage in OSBA training on proper board conduct. I would just, offer the one area of OSBA training that came up for me here was compliance with public ethics law. And that suggestion to Marie to add that to our list. But I, again, don't see anything in this complaint that would warrant recommendation to the foundation members to remove Dan from the board.
I agree.
I agree. It seems to me that, you know, Dan's in the first allegation, his concern as a parent and just desire to educate himself, not acting on behalf of the school, is just, I mean, especially at such a sensitive time, it's very disappointing. I think that the COLA raised to 4%, I just, you know, the fact that it would promote his own fiscal agenda, it just seems completely egregious. Not to mention that, you know, as a board, are we not here to raise the standard? And thirdly, you know, I think if it's a threat when folks ask sensible, reasonable questions, that's very concerning. I don't think Dan asked a question that was out of bounds. You know, his communication was very respectful. I don't know how it could be conceived as snide, and I think he actually got a snide reply. So I'm sorry, Dan, and I think you've been doing a really excellent job, and I feel like you're just being personally attacked.
I agree. I mean, I think this is a misuse of the complaint process. You know, I understand that our former business manager was upset with the direction the board took, and this complaint was filed at that sensitive time when she also resigned, submitted her resignation, and but I don't think the complaint process should be used for personal attacks. I always am open to and appreciate improvement in board process and learning from our mistakes. But keeping a volunteer board member up until 9 p.m. when their kids are going to sleep and dragging them through all of this process because you're not happy, or with very vague complaints that offer almost no evidence, context, or folks to further address, does feel like a misuse of this process to me and abuse of a board member. Anyway, I'd like to get home to my 5-month-old. I came into Hood River to be in my office. I also need to return this computer to my sister. So I entertain a motion if someone's got one here.
Yeah, so I'll move that the board find no reason to act as a result of this complaint to make any recommendation to the foundation membership. No action required there. And that the board, I think, that no action is required really. I think we've already addressed OSBA training. We've started on OSBA training. We've covered specific areas we want to drill in on as a result of the previous complaint. So I'll move that no additional actions are required as a result of this complaint.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thanks, Avelia. All in favor? Any opposed? All right. How do we adjourn a meeting? I believe that's the last agenda item. Dan, do you have any final words? You get to speak if you'd like.
Can I just take 1 minute to make, I have a statement that I wrote out that I'd like to make.
Yes, please do.
I want to make sure that I thank all the members of the community who have come together in this challenging time and persevered. The board is working together, united, better than I've ever seen. The staff are putting in an extra effort to make sure we're successful and that the school is ready for next year. The MTA is united and working eagerly towards our next school year. Our parent volunteers are continuing to work on grants and the success of our school. And without all of you, this would not be possible. I'm humbled by how much support we have received from those mentioned here, but also the Columbia Gorge GSD, District 21, past administrators, past board members and community members who love this school and want to see it succeed. Thank you. You make this work have a meaning and you add value to the purpose. I appreciate you all.
Thanks, Dan. And I think that adjourns our meeting.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone,
Thank
for hanging in there. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Robin.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.